Chapter 945. Xingyue Tianyan. Who was the one with the high energy warning just now? Why don't you make it clear? EW. No, the baby is going to vomit for a while. Has your streaming room always been so bloody and violent? F***CK. You're going to split me and my horse in half? Streamer Wadajun. Why hasn't such a bloody and violent live broadcast room been shut down? Feng's remembrance. You make it sound like the streamer who promoted a certain color has been censored. Chow Lauda. Watching this kind of live stream in the middle of the night. It's really creepy. Why couldn't the cross-dimensional live stream be more harmonious? It was either pornographic or violent. Watching too much of it would affect the physical and mental health of young children. That was the content of the blue bullet screen. Compared to their panic, the red bullet screen viewers were much calmer. He was not surprised at all. Wuya Zhongsheng. The host isn't always so violent. She's usually reasonable. She only uses her fists when she can't be reasoned with. Those people from the northern borderline are asking for a beating. My streamer is so handsome that he has no friends. Host, when are you going to marry me? Bellflower in the starry sky. The streamer is a master of the aesthetics of violence. She gets more and more violent every time. In the past, he only knew how to chop people with axes. Now he could even chop people and horses in half. Full marks for that close-up just now. Jiang Pingji personally led the troops at Sang Mo's granary. When the two parties engaged in battle, she would act as a member of the Zhanma battalion. The horse-chopping battalion was a special battalion that she had specially trained to deal with the cavalry of the northern borderline. The weapons in their hands were all specially forged, and the modeo in their hands was incomparably sharp. The blades were heavy and broad. Compared to the speed of the cavalry, the horse-slaying battalion pursued stability and ruthlessness. They didn't need a lot of speed. They just needed to coordinate with other units to resist the cavalry and reduce the pressure on all sides. The soldiers of the horse-chopping camp were all carefully selected from the various battalions. Their pay was twice as high as that of ordinary soldiers, and their daily training was also much heavier. Because the armors and weapons used by the horse-chopping camp were heavier, the requirement for the soldiers' stamina and strength was higher. If they didn't have a strong physique and strength, they wouldn't be able to fight for a long time. In order to increase their endurance in battle, Jiang Pingji also allowed the soldiers of the Zhanma battalion to adopt the improved three-stage battle tactic of the crossbowmen. Take turns to lighten the load. In addition to all kinds of high-intensity training, the various military camps would also hold regular military exercises. Different units would cooperate and fight against each other. Although the military drill was fake, Jiang Pingji let the veterans lead the new recruits in pursuit of a simulated battle environment. Most of the soldiers under him had never seen blood before, but their combat skills and obedience to orders were not inferior to elite soldiers. The streaming room was always the Jiang Pingji Jiangzhang's perspective. She, who had always walked the agile route, gave up on speed and changed the weapon in her hand from a spear to a heavy zamadeo. With every swing of the blade, the audience could clearly see the entire process of the blade slicing through flesh. She did not deliberately restrain her strength. The heavy zamadeo in her hand was like nothing. Chopping. War. Jiang. Jiang. Blood, blood. Blood. The audience of the stream. The Tian. The king. The king. Hoo. The Taiwit, the horse. The audience in the streaming room saw with their own eyes that Jiang Pengji swung her sword downwards. Like watching a watermelon, she split open the body of a soldier from the northern borderline's head. She also cut the warhorse under him into two at the waist. Jiang Pengji. The king. The king. The king. The king. Most of the northern borderline cavalry was light cavalry. They followed the rogue policy of running away if they couldn't win. They had always been a headache for the Dongqing military. However, they were blocked by the wagon they brought. Jiang Pingji. The Zhanma battalion formed a curved formation to block their way. She surrounded them. She planned to wipe out the enemy. How could she let the meat fly away? Compared to Sang Mo and Li Jiang, Chao Wu's granary was a rat's paradise. What kind of soldiers are Lu Shi's? The soldiers of the Central Plains are all useless. None of them can fight. The second prince broke through the defense of Chao Wu's granary. The defense of the camp was weak. They fought in a hurry. Soon, they were defeated and ran in all directions. The second prince looked at Chao Wu's granary. He was proud of himself. Don't chase. Move the food. The second prince cut off the heads of the corpses. He tied their hair into knots and hung them on the saddle. These were his spoils of war. They were strong evidence of his military strength. He broke open the door of the granary. It was full of food. To be cautious, the second prince used the dagger at his waist to cut open a few bags of food. Clear yellow grains flowed out like water. Lu Shi is rich. It's all good food. After confirming it, the second prince ordered people to move the food. The advisor followed the second prince. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what. After a while he said, "Your Highness, there's so much food in Chao Wu's granary. Why didn't Lu Shi send a large number of soldiers to guard it?" The second prince said, "A large number of soldiers? Didn't you see those deserters? There are at least 5,000 or 6,000 of them, right?" According to combat experience, the number of soldiers guarding the granary was about that. However, the advisor didn't know that there were only about 2,000 soldiers guarding the granary. The number of 5,000 or 6,000 was too much. The soldiers seemed disorderly, but they were actually prepared to flee. They ran in other directions. After several trips, it gave the illusion that there were 5,000 or 6,000 deserters. I heard that Lu Shi trained his soldiers for 3 or 5 years. His elite soldiers are like this. The advisor awkwardly found a way out for himself to avoid angering the second prince again. The second prince laughed and said, "Sheep are sheep. No matter how they train, how can they beat the wolves on the grassland?" The Han men of the Central Plains gave him the impression that they were weak bamboo poles that could be blown away by the wind. Such men couldn't even satisfy the Han women, let alone fight the valiant generals of the northern borderline. The entire granary of Chao Wu had a total of 1.4 million don of grain. Even if the second prince brought 12,000 soldiers and horses, they couldn't load all of them into the supply wagons in a short time. Moreover, they did not bring that many wagons with them. If I had known that there was so much grain here, and that the soldiers guarding the grain were so weak, I would have brought 10 more wagons. In order not to waste food, every wagon was filled with grain. The wheels were deeply embedded in the mud. Not only were the wagons full of grain, but he also asked each cavalry to carry 2 bags of grain on their backs. Seeing this, the advisor's scalp went numb. The cavalry's advantage was their mobility. How could they run if they encountered danger with the heavy bags of grain on their backs? "Your Highness, this is not appropriate." Chapter 946. I know what you're worried about. Aren't you afraid of Lu Shi's sudden appearance? You're as timid as a mouse. The second prince laughed. His face was insolent, and his eyes were filled with contempt and disdain. He said arrogantly, "So what if she comes? It just so happens that I lack a concubine to warm my bed. If she comes, I can reluctantly accept her. When I'm done playing, I'll let you have a taste of her to boost your courage." The advisor did not refute him, because he knew that the second prince was in high spirits, and no one could provoke him. He had long been accustomed to the second prince's arrogance. At this time, he could only shake his head tiredly. He was hopeless. Now he could only hope that everything would go smoothly, and nothing would go wrong along the way. However, some people could not stand nagging, such as Jiang Pingji, whom the advisor was worried about. The second prince smiled and said, "You're really worrying for nothing. I'll..." Before he finished speaking, the ground under his feet trembled slightly, as if something was rushing from afar. At first, the movement was so small that it was almost undetectable. As time went by, the movement became more and more obvious. The pebbles on the ground also trembled. The ground moved. This was the advisor's first reaction. His second reaction was, his heart skipped a beat, and a terrible idea came to mind. Quickly abandon all the provisions. There's an enemy attack," the advisor roared. The second prince was about to turn over and get on the horse when he suddenly heard the roar. He stumbled and almost fell off the horse. "What are you roaring for? Where did the enemy attack come from?" The second prince's reaction was a beat slower. The trembling under his feet became more and more obvious. Only then did he realize that something was wrong. "Is this an earthquake?" The second prince did not think in the direction of the enemy attack at all. He thought that it was a natural disaster. No, it's not an earthquake. It's clearly an enemy attack. Your Highness, please give the order immediately to abandon the provisions and fight. The advisor's breathing was rapid, and he was in a panic. It was dark around him, as if there were countless giant beasts hibernating in the darkness and staring at him. A feeling of suffocation surged in his heart. The advisor lost his composure and shouted at the second prince, hoping to drown out the commotion around him. The second prince was angry and was about to speak when a scout came riding quickly on a horse. "Whoa!" The scout turned over and dismounted. He said to the second prince, "There are traces of enemies on the left flank." Unable to determine the specific number, the second prince's eyes widened in shock. How could there be enemies? Could it be that the granary guard, who just ran away, called for help? That's not right. Chao Wu's granary is 2 days' journey from Lu Shi's military camp. It's only been a few hours. How can he call for reinforcements in time? When the advisor saw that the second prince was still staring at him, he was so angry that he wanted to jump up and curse. Was there even a need to think about such a stupid question? It was clearly premeditated. At this time, the right-wing scout also hurried over on horseback. "Report. Our right wing has discovered an unknown number of enemies." The second prince had led his troops to clear out small tribes, but his combat experience was of no value at all. He was dumbfounded when he encountered a big scene. "Quickly abandon the rations and prepare for battle." The advisor was so angry that his face turned red. Now he could not count on the second prince as a teammate at all. He could only rely on him to overstep his authority. The advantage of the cavalry of the northern borderline was their mobility. How could they fight a battle with 2 big sacks of provisions on their backs? Once the horse was engaged in battle with the enemy, it would not be able to gallop. It could only coordinate with the enemy's attacks or trample on them. The advantage of speed would disappear. At this time, if they carried 2 heavy sacks of provisions to fight a battle, perhaps the soldiers on the horses would not die of exhaustion, but the horses would collapse. The second prince's eyes were red. He stared at the advisor and clenched his teeth. "Listen to my order. Abandon the rations and form a formation to fight." They had brought too many wagons that were used to steal provisions. They could not form a formation at all. The advantage of charging to cut through the enemy's formation was also lost. Everything happened too suddenly. The second prince, the leader, was a fool. The people below him could only be at a loss like headless flies. Fortunately, they still had the qualities of the soldiers of the northern borderline. When they encountered traces of the enemy, they wanted to form a formation immediately. Due to the obstruction of the wagons, the process seemed slow and inefficient. While they were in a mess, the enemy's army had already attacked from the left and right flanks, outflanking them. Jiang Pingji led the vanguard battalion of the cavalry and took the lead. She took the longbow from the back of the horse and lit the arrow. She let go of the reins while charging and easily pulled the bow to a full moon. "Release!" Jiang Pingji released the bowstring when she was less than 100 feet away from the enemy troops of the northern borderline. After a buzzing sound, the burning arrow streaked across the sky with a smear of orange and shot into the enemy's territory. After the arrow was fired, she took control of the reins again. She steered the warhorse under her to turn quickly to the other side. The soldiers of the cavalry battalion could not shoot from a long distance like her, but they did a good job. Han Mei really has a tacit understanding. He came neither early nor late. As the saying goes, it is better to come at the right time than to come early. Li Yan's sneak attack was coordinated perfectly. Jiang Pingji had a carefree smile on her face. She galloped on the horse and shot a few waves of fire arrows, all aimed at the cavalry of the northern borderline. Zhenshi Minguzi, "Streamer, the rations are all piled up there. If you fire the fire arrows, won't they all burn?" They knew Jiang Pingji's temperament. She was generous to others, but she was stingy with her own food. Every time she ate, she always ate the last grain of rice. To let such a thrifty person set fire to the food that the people had painstakingly cultivated was really heart-wrenching. Tian Kasai, if you don't sacrifice your child, you won't be able to catch the wolf. Using such a batch of rations to exchange for tens of thousands of soldiers and horses from the northern borderline is a great deal. If the cavalry of the northern borderline were to enter the battlefield, not only would the streamer lose rations, but she would also lose many elite troops that she had painstakingly trained. Moreover, didn't you notice that after the fire arrows were fired, the fire quickly grew bigger? After being reminded by the audience in the streaming room, many people came to their senses. That's right, the fire was too big. Although it was a dry and flammable season, it shouldn't have caught fire so easily, right? At that moment, a veteran in the streaming room pointed out the key point. Yewu Yenling. There's a problem with the rations. The audience strenuously observed. Indeed, they discovered that the stray fire arrows had pierced the rations, and the fire had spread quickly. Nuzwang Xinghan. The streamer is indeed wicked. Other than the outermost rations in the Chaowu granary that are real, the ones inside are all fake, right? No matter how vigilant the enemy is, it is impossible for them to open up all the rations and check them. Just as the audience guessed, Jiang Pingji only put tens of thousands of dawn of real rations in the Chaowu granary. The rest were all fake. Shinjia. But I have a doubt. If it's fake rations, won't the grain bag feel different when touched? How could Jiang Pingji not consider this problem? She asked someone to smear the inside of the grain bag with a sticky liquid, then rolled it in the rations and stuck a layer of rations on it. Chapter 947. At this time, not only the audience in the live broadcast room found something fishy, but the cavalry of the northern borderline also found something wrong. The advisor felt his teeth tremble. He raised his hand to pull out a dagger and fiercely cut open the grain bag. The inside of the grain bag was thick with grain, but apart from this layer, it was full of hay, firewood, and stones. It was fake. It was all fake. They were fooled. At this moment, the advisor regretted it. Lu Shi was able to get to where he was today. How could he be an ordinary person who relied on his father? If the map of the granary was so easy to get, how could Lu Shi get to where he was today? From the beginning to the end, it was all Lu Shi's plan, to lead their second prince here. In an instant, the advisor's mind turned again and again. He even wanted to escape during the chaos. If he continued to follow the second prince, he wouldn't even know when he would die. But the advisor also knew that he was just a scholar. Without the protection of the soldiers, he might be shot into a hornet's nest as soon as he went out. On the other side, the advisor was experiencing mental torture, and the second prince was not in a good situation either. He had never experienced such a big battle before. When he conquered a small tribe, it seemed that he was the one in command, but in fact, it was the same without him. It was just a small tribe. How could they fight against the iron hooves of the northern borderline? The victory of the small tribe made the second prince arrogant, and he had no idea of his real ability. He thought that if others praised him for being brave and good at fighting, he would really be brave and good at fighting. He didn't know that if he was not the second prince of the northern borderline king, he was not even a fart. At most, he was an arrogant bastard. Don't panic, don't panic. I will kill anyone who dares to panic. Get into formation. Get into formation. Get into formation. Do you hear me? Damn. Who dares to escape? No matter how stupid he was, he knew how bad the situation was. The fire spread, and the war horse was frightened and kept running around. It took the second prince a lot of effort to calm it down. The soldiers around him were in a mess, like headless flies. He was angry and pulled out his sword to cut off the head of the person next to him. Relying on bloody means to win a trace of calmness. Needless to say, this trick really worked, and the formation of the northern borderline soldiers finally had some shape. The advisor hurriedly said, "Your Highness, the most important thing right now is your safety." His words reminded the second prince of something. Nothing was more important than his life. Round after round of fire arrows were fired from the outside. It was as if Lu Shi's soldiers were surrounding them from all directions. It was impossible to find a way out. But the chief planner is that old man Sunwon. This old man has a bright future. When he's done undercover, he'll be among the top strategists. The trick was used too well. Who was Sunwon? The audience was stunned for another 2 seconds. They couldn't be blamed for their poor memory. It was because Sun Wen had never appeared in the streaming room, and they hadn't seen him. Emo Lingyin. Sigh Sun Wen. I've personally witnessed the rise of another Prince Charming in the streaming room. Although Sun Wen was an old man whose grandson was 7 or 8 years old, his charm didn't discriminate by age. The audience paid unprecedented attention to Sun Wen. Jiang Pingji couldn't care less about the streaming room. She led the troops to chase after the second prince and his men. What a joke! Capturing the second prince would be considered a real victory. If they let this fat fish escape, the value of this operation would be reduced by at least 50%. The advisor held the reins tightly and leaned over the horse's back. The warhorse was too bumpy. He felt as if his internal organs were going to be shaken out. There are pursuers behind us. The second prince only cared about running for his life. His nerves had long been stretched taut. Hearing that there were pursuers behind him, he was so anxious that he whipped the horses, but hard, and tried to speed up. Hurry, 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 he screamed anxiously in his heart. Unfortunately, the gods of the grassland didn't hear his prayers. The god of slaughter had already drawn his bow and arrow from behind him. He pulled the bow fully and suddenly released it. There was a buzzing sound in his ears, like a cool breeze blowing beside his ears. In the next moment, he felt something sharp piercing into his right shoulder. The sharp pain spread from his shoulder to his whole body. He couldn't maintain his posture. He screamed and fell directly from the horse to the ground. Capture the barbarians of the northern borderline alive. Jiang Pingji put away her bow and arrow. She took out her Mo sword and chopped off the heads of several people at the end of the enemy troops. Chapter 948. Ah! A loud and tragic cry sounded. The second prince's shoulder was pierced by Jiang Pingji's arrow. The intense pain and the residual force of the arrow forced him to lose his balance and fall off the horse. His horse sprinted forward for a long distance due to inertia. Fortunately, the second prince was lucky. He was not trampled by the horse's hooves and caused a second injury, but he was dizzy from the fall. The advisor, who was holding the reins, heard the movement and looked back from the horse's back. The second prince had fallen off the horse. The pursuers behind him were quickly closing the distance. Now there were only 2 options in front of him. Either he turned around and went back to save the second prince, or he continued to run. Escape was the best strategy of the 36 stratagems. These 2 options went through the advisor's mind. He chose the former without hesitation. It was not because he was loyal, but because he knew that this was a battlefield in Jiang Pingji's territory. If he chose the latter and ran away alone, there was a 99% chance that he would be caught by Lu Shi's troops who were cleaning up the battlefield. The probability of his death was extremely high. Even if he was lucky enough to escape, there was no way for him to return to the northern borderline safely. Even if he returned to the northern borderline, he would definitely die. He could not afford to lose a prince of the northern borderline. On the contrary, if he turned back at this time, there was a high chance that he would become a captive. He would lose his freedom, but his life would be guaranteed. If he was lucky, he might have a chance to be recruited. He could take advantage of the situation and jump onto Lu Shi's ship. It was a way out. In a split second, the advisor had thought through everything and even arranged a seemingly perfect escape route for himself. Second prince, come and save his highness. The advisor turned his horse around. When he arrived, several soldiers of the northern borderline had already carried the unconscious second prince onto the back of the horse. However, they could not stop the enemies who were approaching quickly from behind. Not to mention the ruthless killer. You send the second prince away first. I will stay with the others to delay them. The advisor secretly gritted his teeth and made a decision. It seemed that he was making a righteous decision, but in fact, he was playing a petty trick. The enemy's hatred was always on the second prince. Even if they stayed to delay them, the enemy would split up to chase after them. The personal guard did not say much. He raised his hand and whipped the horse. The horses neighed in pain and galloped madly. In less than 2 breaths, the enemies at the very front had arrived. My life is over. The advisor chose to hide behind the soldiers to preserve his life as much as possible. Jiang Pingji rushed and killed several people along the way. She had the imposing manner of killing anyone who stood in her way, and killing anyone who stood in her way. The advisor's heart was about to burst from fear. Kill anyone who dares to resist. The rest of you follow me. She said that she would break his legs if she caught him. And she meant it. Jiang Pingji did not stop at all. She rode on her horse and killed from left to right. The warhorse under her raised its hooves and stomped on the ground. Soon, the cavalrymen who were left behind were killed, and their horses were thrown off their feet. Jiang Pingji chased after the second prince. The cavalry of the northern borderline tried to stop them, but the cavalry vanguard battalion led by Jiang Pingji was not to be trifled with. Jiang Pingji's night vision was excellent. Others might only be able to see a blurry silhouette, but she could see it clearly. Jiang Pingji aimed at the second prince, who was carried by the guards of the northern borderline, and pulled out another arrow. Zhaoyue. Ha ha ha. I feel sorry for the second prince. If his subordinates did not drag him away, he would only have to suffer once. Jiang Pingji once again demonstrated her superb archery skills. With one arrow, she shot through the second prince and the guards who were carrying him. If she did not want to capture him alive, the arrow would have been aimed at their vital parts. Yurin Mashingsing. Tisk Tsk. The warhorse is not much shorter than an adult. He was shot by 2 arrows and fell off the warhorse twice. How unlucky must he be able to do that? From what I see, even if the streamer showed mercy, the second prince will still become silly from the fall. Zijulin Shuxian. The person above, you are wrong. Why would the second prince need to fall silly? His IQ and brain are not that great, right? After falling, maybe he did not become silly. Instead, he became smarter. After all, he could not be any more silly. Su Shuewei. The streamer's archery skills are so amazing that I have no friends. Can you guys make it? When I saw the dazzling arrow she shot in the live streaming room, it did not feel like it fell on the husky prince. It clearly hit the baby's heart, his whole body. Li Wushuang. The husky prince flips the table. Do you think I don't care about my reputation? When the audience in the live streaming room jokingly called the second prince of the northern borderline the husky prince, Jiang Pingji had already caught up with them. Needless to say, which mortal body could withstand the Zamadeo in her hand and her strange strength? People were cutting melons and vegetables, but she was cutting people like melons and vegetables. With one slash, not only the person, but also the horse that the person was riding was cut into 2. Uft. After a quarter of an hour, Jiang Pingji spat out the blood that had accidentally flowed into her mouth. The elites of the northern borderline still had some courage. Half of them resisted stubbornly and were killed, while the other half gave up because their morale was greatly reduced. Jiang Pingji's chest rose and fell rapidly. She breathed rapidly and shouted angrily. Tie them all up. How about the animals? How about them? Yes. The subordinate obeyed the order. Jiang Pingji threw the Zamadeo in her hand to the side and asked, Where is the fat fish? Jiang Pingji could use such a contemptuous term as fat fish to humiliate her opponent, but the vanguard battalion under her did not dare to say the same. The enemy's general has been captured. 2 soldiers dragged the second prince, who had been shot twice and had fainted. Accompanying him was the advisor, who was in a sorry state. The advisor was dressed like a scholar. At a glance, it was obvious that he was a scholar who engaged in intellectual activities. The soldiers were not too rough with him. Jiang Pingji snorted coldly and said, Wake him up. The advisor's shoulders were held by someone, and he could not move. He secretly glanced at Jiang Pingji, but his vision was dim. She was covered in blood from head to toe, and he could not knock her out. Although he could not see it, he could feel the terrifying aura that lingered around her. Even the king of the northern borderline did not have such an aura. When the soldiers came forward with a torch, the advisor tried his best to blink and stretch his neck to look at Jiang Pingji. Suddenly, Jiang Pingji turned her head and glared at him. Her eyes were full of intimidation. The advisor was so scared that he retracted his neck, lowered his head, and shrunk his shoulders. He did not dare to make a sound. On the other side, the soldiers followed Jiang Pingji's instructions and forcefully woke the second prince up. When he woke up, he was surrounded by a circle of people. These people were dressed very strangely, and the leader looked at him coldly, as if he was looking at a dead man. The second prince suddenly shivered. He accidentally injured 2 arrow wounds. The pain made him want to faint. I said. Jiang Pingji panted heavily and took 2 steps forward to the side of the second prince. Chapter 949. When the second prince heard this, he shivered and almost forgot the pain in his body. He stared at Jiang Pingji and said fiercely, "The winner takes it all. What's there to talk about?" Hee, the winner takes it all? That's nice to hear. Jiang Pingji lifted her foot and kicked his face to the side. It didn't take long for it to swell. The advisor's eyes widened. He looked at Jiang Pingji and then at the second prince. After all, the second prince was the prince of the northern borderline. His identity had important political and strategic significance. Even if Jiang Pingji captured him, she should treat him well, not to mention humiliating him. Jiang Pingji could use this person to exchange for a lot of strategic resources from the northern borderline. It wasn't that she didn't understand this principle, but she still did it. Was this considered humiliation? If she didn't care about his worthless life, that kick would have sent his head flying. How could it just be a swollen face? Lushi, there's a saying in the Central Plains that goes like this. You can kill me or cut me up, but you can't humiliate me. The second prince was tough for once. As the prince of the northern borderline, he was the most promising candidate for the throne. When had he ever been humiliated like this? Of course not. I'm going to step on you and humiliate you. What can you do to me? Jiang Pingji lifted her foot and stepped on his face so that he couldn't get up. She used a little strength and forced half of his face into the ground. The second prince was furious. The advisor was quiet. The audience in the streaming room didn't even dare to breathe. Through the screen, they could feel the anger in Jiang Pingji. It was like an active volcano that had been suppressed for a long time. Maybe in the next moment, the eruption of magma could bring about a scene of doomsday. The streamer had always been good-tempered. Why was she suddenly so violent? The audience was puzzled, but they believed that Jiang Pingji must have a reason for doing so. In fact, it was true. As mentioned earlier, Jiang Pingji had excellent night vision. With the help of the camera in the streaming room, the surrounding scene was as bright as day. In this way, she could clearly see the string of heads strung on the second prince's saddle. Sacrifices were inevitable in war. Jiang Pingji arranged for those people to guard the Chaowu granary. She knew that the risk factor they faced was extremely high. It was very likely that they would all be wiped out. She had seen through life and death in her previous life. As long as it was a war, there would always be sacrifices. Even if it wasn't this person, it would be someone else, or even herself. The death of the soldiers could not trigger her anger, but she could not tolerate the act of humiliating the remains of the soldiers. I said, "I'll break your legs." I meant what I said. Half of the second prince's face hurt, and the pain affected his hearing, so he did not hear what the man had said. The advisor's scalp went numb as he listened. He watched helplessly as Jiang Pingji took 2 steps back and raised her foot to step on his knee. He exerted force with his right foot and crushed the ground with the tip of his toe. Jiang Pingji did not use much strength, but the second prince's knee made a bone-cracking sound. The second prince was in so much pain that his entire body was convulsing, and he screamed incessantly. His shrill screams made everyone present tense up, and they felt a chill run down their spines. After letting out a shrill scream, the second prince fainted with a pale face. Everyone who witnessed this shuddered in fear. However, there were also some thick-skinned audience members who ridiculed him. Kumo lemon juice. How is this breaking his legs? This is clearly breaking his kneecaps while he's still alive. Jiang Pingji released her foot and said to the person beside her, "Take him away. Send someone to take good care of his wounds. Don't let him die." The advisor heaved a long sigh of relief when he heard this. It seemed that Lushi was ruthless, but she was still rational. Little did he know that Jiang Pingji did not kill him on the spot, because she wanted him to die more miserably. "My lord." Li Yun led a group of soldiers and horses to catch up. He was slightly injured, but his face was still rosy and he was in high spirits. "The person has been caught. Clean up the battlefield," Jiang Pingji said coldly. "Rest and reorganize. The army will set off tomorrow morning." Li Yun said, "This general obeys." I hope Jingtu's side does not disappoint. She was a little irritable. If Fu Wang failed to take down the 3 cities, or if the losses from taking down the 3 cities exceeded expectations, she would be furious. Li Yun said calmly, "My lord, please rest assured. General Fu will definitely bring you good news." No matter what, Fu Wang was once the #1 general under the Mengs. Taking down cities was not a problem. Oh, I hope so. If Fu Wang could not take down the 3 empty cities where most of his troops had been transferred, he would not live up to his reputation. The advisor had not been taken away yet. He faintly heard the conversation between Jiang Pingji and Li Yun. His heart skipped a beat. He suddenly remembered that the second prince had rushed over to steal the grain and transferred away most of the garrison. Without sufficient garrison, how could the 3 cities of Shangyu resist Lu Shi's well-prepared army? Lu Shi had taken down the 3 cities as easily as taking something out of his pocket. Thinking of this, the advisor regretted it so much that his intestines turned green. From the moment the second prince obtained the distribution map of the granaries to the current defeat, it was clearly a meticulous scheme by the other party. On the other hand, Fu Wang's performance did not disappoint his illustrious reputation. His fighting spirit was high. Within 2 days, he had taken down the 3 cities consecutively. He was invincible. Without spending much effort, he had taken back the 3 cities that the people of Dongqing had yearned for a long time. A flag with the word Lu was raised on the city walls. When Jiang Pingji arrived, Fu Wang was sending people to clean up the battlefield and retrieve the corpses of the sacrificed soldiers. "Greetings, my lord. Fortunately, I did not fail you." Strictly speaking, this was Fu Wang's first battle after joining Jiang Pingji's camp. If Fu Wang's performance was not outstanding enough, it would more or less affect his prestige in the army. "Thank you for your hard work." Jiang Pingji stood on the city walls and looked into the distance. Her lips curled into a bloodthirsty smile. The 3 cities of Shangyu were located at the border between the northern borderline and Dongqing. Their city walls were tall, wide, thick, and hard. It was like a natural moat guarding the area. The 3 cities were built along the mountain range and relied on the natural barrier. Past this mountain range was the territory of the northern borderline. The northern borderline occupied the 3 cities. Without the mountain range as a hindrance, they could use the 3 cities as a base to attack Dongqing. It was precisely because of this that Dongqing had been so afraid of the northern borderline all these years. Now that the 3 cities were in Jiang Pingji's hands, the situation was completely reversed. Sun Wen had once fooled the 4th prince by saying that the construction of the 3 cities would slow down Jiang Pingji's progress in the north. There was nothing wrong with this sentence. The mistake was that Jiang Pingji had no intention of rebuilding the 3 cities. She was already preparing to attack the northern borderline. The 3 cities of Shangyu were the center of the war. Was there any point in developing this place? From the beginning, Jiang Pingji had planned to build the 3 cities of Shangyu into strategic military locations. She would use them as a springboard to attack the northern borderline. The basic construction of the 3 cities of Shangyu was still there. With a little modification, they could be put into use to defend against strong enemies. Jiang Pingji said to Fu Wang, "Increase the number of troops to guard the 3 cities. The border guards of the northern borderline should have reacted by now. However, even if they reacted, it would be too late." Chapter 950. The second prince was afraid that others would find out about his plan to steal the grain and steal his credit, so he guarded against others like a thief. He volunteered to guard the 3 cities of Shangyu and found an excuse to dismiss the former garrison general. Because of this, the border guards of Northern Territory hadn't received any news about Fu Wang conquering the 3 cities of Shangyu. By the time they received the news, Jiang Pingji and Li Yun had already brought reinforcements to reinforce the 3 cities of Shangyu. Relying on the sturdiness of the city walls and a large number of defensive weapons, they defended the 3 cities with all their might. The soldiers of the northern borderline did not have enough logistical reserves. If the 2 sides confronted each other, the northern borderline would definitely give in and retreat. Jiang Pingji looked at the densely packed enemy troops below the city walls. Her ears were filled with their curses and vulgarities. "Your Highness, Why don't you let me lead the troops to face the enemy and teach them a lesson? Han Mei, stay calm. Qiguan Rang glanced at his lord's cold face and tugged at Li Yun's armor in a low voice to prevent this fellow from acting on impulse. Counselor, how can we endure this? These northern borderline barbarians are scolding. Li Yun swallowed the rest of his words, but his expression was still filled with rage. The Lord has her own decisions. Do you think she likes to suffer losses? Qiguan Rang advised in a low voice. Why are the people outside cursing her so harshly? Isn't it just to provoke us into sending troops to meet the enemy? It won't do us any good to send troops now. As the 3 cities of Shangyu had just been conquered, most of the people living in these cities were people who were close to the northern region. If they take advantage of the time we are facing the enemy and secretly attack us from the inside, we might lose the 3 cities that we have plotted with great difficulty. Let them shout and curse. They won't be able to hold on for more than a few days and will withdraw on their own. Li Yun was no longer the youngster from before. Of course, he could see the battle situation clearly. However, listen to the content of the curses outside. Insulting them for being cowards was one thing. This kind of insignificant scolding was nothing. Flirting with their lord, making all kinds of dirty jokes and dirty words, and even bringing in the lord's maternal relatives. This was too despicable. If we allow them to continue insulting us, where will our lord's dignity be? Li Yun was so angry that his eyes widened. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his weapon tightly. Even the good-tempered little angel couldn't stand it anymore. The person these people from the northern borderline were insulting was their lord. Even if it was just verbal obscenities, if word got out, what would happen to the lord's reputation? Everyone understands this, but if the lord doesn't say anything, what can we do? Qiguan Rang gripped the handle of his fan tightly. He looked calm and composed, but his anxious action of fanning revealed his true emotions. Qiguan Rang and the others were not the only ones who could not take it anymore. The viewers in the live streaming room were also anxious. They wanted nothing more than to rush into the screen and argue with the soldiers of the northern borderline. Holy *T. Was their family's little princess someone anyone could insult? Believe it or not, they will use Hua Nation's language to scold these bastards of the Beijiang to death. When it came to the essence of scolding people, how could these uncivilized barbarians of the northern borderline be their opponents? Lao Siji Lianmeng. Streamer, they're cursing so harshly. It's not like you to continue tolerating it. What kind of anchors should they know? There was nothing to lose. They had to admit that they understood Jiang Pingji quite well. What's the rush? I'm the one being scolded, but I'm not worried at all. Jiang Pingji smiled and comforted Li Yun. Her mental fortitude was far stronger than everyone imagined. It was just verbal abuse. It was not enough to make her lose her mind. To deal with such despicable people, we can only use more despicable methods. But shrews scolding each other is bad for manners. We can't do that. She muttered to Fu Wang, who was standing silently by the side. Zhengtu, I have something for you to do. Fu Wang's heart skipped a beat. He moved forward to listen to Jiang Pingji's instructions and sighed with emotion. They were indeed despicable. After a quarter of an hour, the soldiers of the northern borderline scolded until their mouths were dry. But the guards on the city wall still did not move. The general of the northern borderline sneered and said sarcastically, "Is this Lu Shi a man or a woman? He doesn't even respond to our scolding?" The people of the northern borderline scolded Jiang Pengji, the same way the shrews in the marketplace scolded the prostitutes. Any woman would have jumped off a building in anger after being scolded by thousands of people. Lu Shi was thick-skinned. Maybe he's enjoying it and thinks we're not doing enough. The deputy general had a meaningful look on his face. That's true. Continue scolding, don't stop. As soon as he finished speaking, a few people emerged from the quiet city wall. Hey, it's working. Don't stop, continue. This Lu Shi is really strange. He won't come out until we're scolding him. Ha ha ha. The soldiers of the northern borderline beside them also roared with laughter. But soon they could not laugh anymore. A few ladders extended from the battlements of the city wall, and a few men who had been stripped naked were tied up and hung out. When the wind blew, a few men floated in the air. Behind them, There were rows of northern borderline captives who had been stripped naked, shivering in fear. Damn! What the hell was Lu Shi doing? You're afraid now? Who asked these barbarians to be so despicable? We have no choice. Fu Wang used the handle of his spear to poke the waist of the second prince's advisor. His clothes were intact, but he was also tied up like a dumpling. He was in a sorry state. The advisor's eye bags were bruised, and his cracked and dry lips looked pale. He was like a bird frightened by the mere twang of a bow. When Fu Wang poked him, his legs went soft, and he almost collapsed to the ground. Fu Wang raised his eyebrows and laughed disdainfully. You're smart if you don't want to be stripped and hung up. In order to survive, the advisor could only close his eyes in despair and shout at the bottom of the city wall at the top of his lungs. I'm the advisor of the second prince. You've seen the prince. Hurry up and save him. Fu Wang raised his hand to pick his ear and frowned. I'm not shouting loudly enough. Continue. The advisor's voice was already thin. Now that he forced himself to shout at the top of his lungs, his voice became hoarse after 2 shouts. Hearing that the person hanging on the city wall was the second prince of the northern borderline, the northern borderline soldiers below were in an uproar. What are you panicking about? Lu Shi is lying to you. Continue scolding. The general of the northern borderline shouted. The soldiers quickly calmed down and continued to curse. The sparse curses became louder again. Fu Wang, who was on the city wall, smiled as he knocked his bow and shot an arrow, breaking a hemp rope. The person hanging on the hemp rope screamed and fell down, turning into a pool of flesh. Hang him up, Fu Wang ordered coldly. The soldiers behind him tied up the naked northern borderline soldiers and hung them up the ladder that extended out of the wall back to the previous position. Witnessing this scene with their own eyes, the people who were hanging earlier were so scared that they urinated and urinated. Filth dripped down from the air. The louder the cursing, the more Fu Wang did not stop. More than a dozen hemp ropes were broken in succession. All the people hanging fell to their deaths without exception. No one knew who Fu Wang would kill next. The advisor of the second prince was so scared that he almost collapsed. The second prince, who was hanging in the center near the city wall, screamed and kicked his feet. His face was covered with snot and tears. Chapter 951. The general guarding the northern borderline knew the second prince. Seeing this, his face was as black as the bottom of a pot. The northern borderline was used to playing rogue, but they didn't expect Lu Shi, who was born in a noble family, to be even more shameless than them. Not only did they strip the captives naked and hang them on the city wall, but they also used them as shooting targets. If they were ordinary captives, it would be fine if a few died, but there was the second prince of the northern borderline among them. A prince of a country was stripped naked and hung on the city wall by the enemy? How shameful and humiliating was that? Our Lord said that you northern borderline men are so courageous. Why do you need to stand in front of the battle and bark? Why don't you just attack the city to your heart's content and save your comrades? If you don't have the guts to attack, shut up. Thanks to your second prince, we have at least 5,000 captives from the northern borderline here. If not 10,000. No matter how long you curse, we will hang some and throw some. The besieging northern borderline general was so angry that he vomited blood. They didn't know whether to curse or not. If they cursed, the second prince might be the next one to be smashed into meat paste. If they didn't curse, why would he stay under the city wall with thousands of elites, watching a few naked guys in the sky poop, vomit, and pee all over the place? General, what should we do now? The deputy general asked the chief general timidly. It was awkward for thousands of them to stay there without doing anything. The chief general was furious. He wanted to whip the deputy general, who didn't know what to do. You ask me? Who should I ask? General, why don't we try to attack the city? Lu Shi has only occupied the 3 cities of Shangyu for 2 days. His foundation is not stable. It's a good time to attack the city. Besides, the troops in the city may not be full. Maybe they are deliberately mystifying and trying to deceive us? Another deputy general was more cultured and spoke in a genteel manner. The Central Plains has a strategy called the empty city strategy. Maybe Lu Shi is using this strategy to deceive us. Now that the second prince is in their hands, If the humiliation today is spread, the northern borderline royal family will lose face. They insulted Jiang Pingji. The content of their insults were all vulgar words. There was no evidence at all, and outsiders would not believe it. But it was true that the second prince was hung on the city wall and humiliated. Thousands of eyes were watching. Who would be more shameful if word of this got out? The deputy general added, "General, if we retreat without any movement, I'm afraid it'll be hard to explain to the king." This sentence was the last straw that broke the camel's back, forcing the commander to make up his mind. Okay, attack the city. If the king of the northern borderline knew that he had retreated without even attacking the city, he was afraid that he would not be able to keep his life. Stuck in a dilemma, he could only try his best. But attacking the city with cavalry? Jiang Pingji sneered. This is probably the funniest joke I've heard this year. The advantages of cavalry were obvious, but the disadvantages were equally obvious. These people had rushed here in a hurry and did not bring enough siege weapons. The ancient city walls were tall and wide, and the cavalry's mobility advantage was completely useless. They did not have enough siege weapons, and their horses were not heavenly horses with wings. How could they break through the city walls? Jiang Pingji was not the only one who was clear about this. The people from the northern borderline were even clearer about it. They pretended to attack for a while, then left behind thousands of corpses and retreated dejectedly. The second prince, who was hanging on the city wall, could not even pee. Jiang Pingji glanced at him and said coldly, "They will come again tomorrow. Continue to hang these people, but remember not to kill them, especially the second prince. In the future, when we go to war with the northern borderline, I'm prepared to use his blood and head as a sacrifice. It'll be a pity if he dies." Fu Wang accepted the order. Yes. After Jiang Pingji left, Fu Wang sent someone to check the captives hanging on the ladder. The second prince was probably a cockroach. He had a strong vitality. He had 2 pierced wounds on his shoulders and broken kneecaps by Jiang Pingji. But such serious injuries did not kill him. He was still panting, his body trembling as he curled up. He looked very pitiful. The other captives did not have the courage to do so. A few of them were scared to death. Fu Wang waved his hand and ordered the soldiers to tie up the captives who were waiting in line and hang them up. Just as Qiguan Rang had predicted, the troops of the northern borderline did not have enough logistics. They could not keep up with the food supply, so they retreated after 2 days of siege. As they retreated, the news that the 3 cities of Shangyu had been reclaimed spread. The people in the north and south had different feelings. Master Yuanjing stretched his back and sighed with a smile. If they don't fly for 3 years, they will grow wings. If they don't fly, they will not sing. If they don't fly, they will soar to the sky. If they don't sing, they will shock the world. This is the true meaning of if they don't sing, they will shock the world with a single brilliant feat. Upon receiving the news, the forces in Wanzhou were jubilant. The people in Dongqing were even more jubilant. They were as happy as if they were celebrating the new year. The 3 cities of Shangyu had always been a fishbone in the hearts of the people of Dongqing. Unfortunately, the northern borderline was too powerful, so they could not reclaim it. But now Jiang Pingji had reclaimed it. The people of the world began to take this female lord seriously. Dongqing Zhangzhou. This is how a daughter should be. Father was right. Yang Tao put down the secret report. His expression became more solemn. He felt that the weight on his shoulders had increased by 2 notches. Not to mention other countries, Dongqing alone had so many strong opponents. He was afraid that he would fail his late father's expectations. The incident with Yang Jian had made him grow up a lot. The childishness of the past had been worn away, leaving only fortitude and maturity. However, faced with the situation of being besieged on all sides, he still felt a little lost. Yanlin saw Yang Tao's emotions and comforted him. Don't belittle yourself. Zhengzi is not bad either. Yes, companions are the best. Dongqing Haozhou. Ha ha ha. I knew it. Lanting is indeed a rare, stalwart man in the world. Madam. When Huang Song received the news, he was having a private conversation with his wife. As soon as he finished lamenting, Lady Qi pinched the soft flesh on his waist. Lady Qi corrected him. She is a woman. What do you mean by saying that she is a man? Are you looking down on women? Huang Song was speechless. How had he offended Lady Qi? When Huang Song's capable strategist, Cheng Jing, heard the news, he tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. Dongqingzhi County, Hu County. The Su and Pei brothers killed the former chief of Hu County, Wuma Shang, while fighting amongst themselves. They peacefully divided up Wuma Shang's property and territory. Without the interference of external forces, they resumed their state of internal strife. Su Bei and Jiang Pingji called each other brothers. When he heard that she had reclaimed the 3 cities of Shangyu, he was happy for her from the bottom of his heart. It wasn't that Su Bei was righteous. It was simply because Jiang Pingji did not hinder his interests. With her standing guard in the north, to resist the pressure from the northern borderline, he could not have asked for more. Su Bei smiled and sighed. Lanting actually has the ability to reclaim the 3 cities of Shangyu and truly make a name for himself. He really cannot be underestimated. Beside him, a tall and slender strategist dressed in green said calmly, "This is a good opportunity for my lord." Good opportunity? What does Wenbin mean? Chapter 952. Forming an alliance and borrowing power? Su Bei furrowed his brows in embarrassment. I'm afraid it's going to be difficult. She's already 19. She's a little old. Han Yu was startled. He looked at his lord's face and asked silently, "Where is your brain going? What does forming an alliance have to do with someone's age?" In the end, she was his lord. No matter how stupid she was, she had to give him face and not let him make a fool of himself. "It's okay," Han Yu said. Su Bei shook his head like a rattledrum. "That won't do. My eldest son is only 10 years old. I can't bear to push him into the fire pit." Han Yu was expressionless, but in fact he was dumbfounded. Su Bei saw that Han Yu did not respond, and thought that Han Yu was silently resisting. He said helplessly, "Wenbin, you can't possibly make me your lord, go there personally. This won't do. Whether Lanting is willing to marry or not is another matter. Even if she is willing to marry, the first wife is still around, and her subordinates are not willing." Since ancient times, the alliance had always used 2 methods. First, it was an exchange of benefits. Second, it was a marriage alliance. Most of the time, these 2 situations would complement each other and coexist. Although their relationship by marriage wasn't strong, it was better than not having this relationship to make him feel at ease. After Han Yu recovered from the shock, he calmed down and said helplessly, "I'm afraid my lord has misunderstood. I didn't mean that." This time, it was Su Bei's turn to feel awkward. But as a lord, which one of them was not thick-skinned? He quickly regained his composure, coughed twice, and asked calmly, "Wenbin, tell us quickly, don't keep us in suspense." Han Yu said, "My lord has a good relationship with Lu Shi. Why don't you send someone to prepare a batch of provisions, and send her a generous gift to congratulate her for taking down the 3 cities of Shangyu? My lord, you don't have to be afraid. You can directly describe the conflict between you and Second Master Su. After the beginning of spring, Lu Shi was bound to wage war with the northern borderline. One could imagine how much pressure he would be under. We can't support her troops, but we can allocate some rations to her." The territory under Su Bei's rule was one of the few fertile lands in Dongqing. The food was plentiful, and there was no need to worry about food and drink. They were not short of food. Although Jiang Pingji had been farming for many years, the war consumed too much food. Once there was a shortage of food, they could only tighten their belts and fight. The gift was just an excuse. The real purpose was to hint to Jiang Pingji that the 2 families should form an alliance. She supported Su Bei, and Su Bei gave her rations. Both parties took what they needed. Not only that, but Su Bei could also gain a good reputation. Supporting Jiang Pingji was equivalent to contributing to the resistance against the foreign tribes. He didn't need to pay a single soldier. He only needed to contribute a bit of food, and he would be able to benefit from it. Su Bei thought about it, and nodded in agreement to Han Yu's suggestion. "Since that's the case, let's do as Wenbin says." Su Bei was very annoyed with that cousin of his. Unfortunately, the other party was always opposing him. It was infuriating. In terms of seniority, no matter what, he was more qualified to be the successor of the Su family. However, That old undying grandfather of his doted on his youngest son and grandson, oppressing him, the eldest son of the first wife, in every way. Their battle was already out in the open, and Su Bei had nowhere to retreat. If he could borrow Lu Shi's power and influence to suppress Su Fei, Su Bei would be more than willing. Nanxing Nation Jiangzhou. As the saying goes, nothing in this world is difficult for those who set their minds to it. And Chui's persistent pestering finally moved Lu Zheng's heart. The feeling of having a strategist and not having one was really different. When he didn't have a strategist, he had to rely on himself. His internal affairs were a mess, and he didn't have anyone to help him strategize. With the help of a strategist, the organization was reinvigorated, and everything was arranged properly. Lu Zheng was deeply moved by An Chui and came out of seclusion to assist him. In the first battle, he helped An Chui conquer half of Jiangzhou, stabilizing his foundation. Now that more than a year had passed, Lu Zheng had successfully won over the hearts of An Chui's subordinates and stabilized his position as the #1 strategist. It was a little embarrassing to say it, but there were no decent strategists under An Chui's command, except for Lu Zheng himself. "Teacher, are you still not asleep?" The boy's servant lit the lamp and added oil to it, making it easier for Lu Zheng to read. "Today's matter ends today. It's hard for me to sleep if I haven't finished it." Lu Zheng was dressed in plain pajamas with a large cloak draped over his shoulders. Half of his face flickered in the orange candlelight. The boy's servant sighed. If he had known that An Chui would be so tired, he wouldn't have persuaded his teacher to help An Chui. "What are you reading, teacher?" The boy's servant noticed that Lu Zheng had been looking at the secret report for a long time, not moving his eyes away. "A secret letter from Dongqing. The lost 3 cities of Shangyu have returned. Teacher should be very pleased." Lu Zheng smiled. There was still green stubble on the side of his lips, and his eyes were bruised and swollen. He looked a few years older than his actual age. The boy's servant let out a short "ah" and asked, "Teacher, is what you said true?" Lu Zheng raised his hand and adjusted the cloak draped over his shoulders. "Of course it's true. Your teacher can't slack off either." "Light another lamp." Although he said that he disliked An Chui, Lu Zheng had been secretly observing him. Seeing that the successive setbacks had slowly worn away An Chui's edges and arrogance, Lu Zheng reluctantly agreed to become an official. As soon as he became an official, he did everything he could to help An Chui find a peaceful place to live. Half of Jiangzhou. Next, it was time to move steadily and further expand his power. An Chui was good in every aspect, except for one thing that gave him a headache. His power was still too weak, and his personnel structure was seriously biased. If he couldn't find someone to share his workload, Lu Zheng suspected that he would overwork himself to death. "Zhengzhou Bianzhou. Little Emperor, you've gone too far. Why don't we just rebel against him?" The man in the black robe slammed the short table heavily. The dull thud hit the hearts of the people present. Ever since the death of the former Empress Du, the emperor had become more and more obsessed with women. He had no interest in court affairs, even allowing relatives and eunuchs to kill loyal subjects. The aristocratic families watched coldly from the sidelines. At first, those involved were mostly commoner families, and had little to do with their interests. Who knew that after 2 or 3 years, the eunuchs and relatives had become so powerful that they could shake the country? The 2 great powers worked together to deal with the aristocratic families, and even plotted several court coups in an attempt to seize power from them. The Nie family of Bianzhou could be considered a first-rate aristocratic family in Zhengzhou. They had a long history, and were naturally the first to bear the brunt. Their political enemies were closing in, but they couldn't keep retreating. What's there to rebel about? This isn't as simple as eating and drinking. There are many implications. We can't act recklessly. If we continue to endure, are we just going to let those rootless eunuchs and peasants bully us? The other party didn't say anything. After a while, "This matter still needs to be discussed with father and the elders. Second brother, don't act rashly." The man called second brother frowned and swallowed his anger. He gritted his teeth and said, "All right, I understand." Because of the incompetent ruler and the demon empress, there were more and more uprisings in Zhengzhou, until the coup of the eunuchs and relatives conspiring to kill the aristocratic families was exposed. Zhongzhou was no longer a country. The nobles supported by the aristocratic families revolted. You all want to die alone, don't you? He had never expected that his second son would be able to raise an army of 20,000 right under his nose. If his second son hadn't been so greedy as to steal Lu Shi's granary and turned around to force him to abdicate, wouldn't he have been dead by now? As soon as this thought popped up in his mind, he could not help but start a series of conspiracy theories. At this moment, he was not sad that his son had fallen into the hands of the enemy and suffered inhumane treatment. Instead, he was secretly happy. His second son, who wielded 20,000 troops, was simply a thorn in his side. Now that it had been removed, he felt much better. The king of the northern borderline took the opportunity to harshly beat his remaining 8 sons. After a few violent bouts of illness, his body was on the verge of collapse. The second prince's actions this time crossed the line. The king of the northern borderline was terrified and guarded against his sons, as if they were thieves. Royal father, I don't dare. Please don't be angry, and take care of yourself. The princes fought to be the first to express their opinions, their faces full of fear. Their acting skills were superb. It would be a waste if they were not given an Oscar. Faced with the king of the northern borderline's harsh words, it did not matter what the other princes thought, but they had to put on the appearance of filial piety. The fourth prince was scolded harshly, but he was secretly overjoyed. It was all because of him that the second prince had fallen to such a state. He knew that the second prince had a lot of private soldiers, but he did not expect it to be to this extent. A total of 20,000 elites. If the other party directly forced him to abdicate, the throne would definitely belong to him. How could he even have a chance? Mr. Sun, you have a divine foresight. You have calculated every possibility. You are really the reincarnation of Prime Minister Huangfu. Prime Minister Huangfu of the Xia dynasty had destroyed the Qinggu tribe's ambition to rule the Central Plains. To them, Prime Minister Huangfu was the most intelligent person. The fourth prince compared Sun Wen to him, which showed how much he admired him. Your Highness, you flatter me. Although he was speaking modestly, Sun Wen actually accepted the fourth prince's bow. The fourth prince said, Sir, although the second prince has been eliminated, there are still others eyeing him. Sir, you have to help me. Don't worry, Your Highness. I have a plan to eliminate the first prince. The fourth prince suddenly thought of the trick that Sun Wen asked him to do. He asked the first prince's men to kill the second prince's patrolling soldiers, which led to the second prince's radical attack on the granary. If they were to frame him, Sir, you mean? Sun Wen said with a smile. Although they are the second prince's private soldiers, they are still the elites of the northern borderline. Now, they have been swallowed by Lu Shi without saying a word. Not only did it damage the northern borderline's reputation, but it also greatly damaged the morale of the northern borderline and weakened their armed forces. When the king's anger subsides, he will be distressed by the loss of 20,000. Your Highness, why don't you choose a good time to mention this matter? If the king knew that the first prince is an insider and has been secretly harming the other princes, I don't know how sad and disappointed he would be. The fourth prince's heart skipped a beat, and a fierce look flashed across his eyes. Sir, you are right. Without the second prince, there was still the first prince of noble birth. As long as the first prince was eliminated, it would be much easier to deal with the other brothers. Under Sun Wen's instigation, the princes of the northern borderline fought fiercely. A month later, the king of the northern borderline fainted from anger again. The first prince was stunned by the flying pot. Even if he opened his mouth wide, he could not defend himself. The king of the northern borderline was already on guard against his sons. He simply took the opportunity to cripple his eldest son. In just 2 months, his eldest son was crippled, and his second son was crippled by Jiang Pingji. Before he could catch his breath, he appointed Wu Liba, the wise man of the northern borderline, as an envoy to Dongqing. It seemed like he wanted an explanation, but in fact, it was for an alliance and reconciliation. The current northern borderline could not withstand a large-scale war. He had to think of a way to scare Jiang Pingji, so that she would not dare to send troops to the northern borderline. As long as these 2 years passed, and the northern borderline recovered a little, he could find Jiang Pingji to settle this blood debt. He had crippled one of his sons and killed 20,000 of his elites. Lu Shi must pay with his blood. Wu Liba carried a heavy responsibility and planned to use his glib tongue to persuade Jiang Pingji. Oh, a gift from the magistrate of Liuzhou? In order to regain the trust of the king of the northern borderline, Wu Liba took the initiative to undertake the heavy responsibility of being an envoy. Along the way, he made various assumptions and countermeasures. Chapter 954. My lord, even if we want to go to war with the northern borderline, it can't be now. Knowing what Jiang Pingji had given Wu Liba, Qiguan Rang almost broke his precious fan. Wenzheng, what are you afraid of? The northern borderline is the one who doesn't want war now. The initiative is with us, and it's not up to them to decide. If Wu Liba can't take it anymore, he can just turn around and leave. Fengzhen didn't mind blowing things up. He grinned and gulped down a mouthful of sake. His salary wasn't low. What kind of good wine couldn't he buy? However, Fengzhen liked to freeload a little from each house. Even if it was unadulterated wine, he enjoyed it. Among all the houses, he liked his lord's wine the most. It tasted more mellow than ordinary liquors. Qiguan Rang glared at Fengzhen. He was right. It must be this wastrel who instigated his lord to cause trouble. Fengzhen received Qiguan Rang's gaze and secretly shrugged. He smiled, revealing his white teeth. He had an expression that said, "What can you do to me?" How could Qiguan Rang not know what kind of person his lord was? His lord was a troublemaker. She couldn't settle down, so why would she need others to instigate her to cause trouble? At most, he gave some suggestions. He could only be considered an accomplice. Jiang Pingji also helped Fengzhen. She said, "They've been bullied by the northern borderline. They're just taking the opportunity to get back at them. Even if I give them 8 or 10, they'll still have to endure it, not to mention one. Wenzheng, do you think the wise man from the northern borderline can guess the meaning behind it?" With his lord's support, Fengzhen proudly puffed out his chest. Qiguan Rang was so angry that his molars were itching. It was one thing to instigate his lord to stir up trouble, but this wastrel was being arrogant. Qiguan Rang's expression was gloomy. The audience laughed and made up stories about the two of them. Jiang Pingji was overjoyed. She secretly laughed until her stomach hurt. On the other side, Wu Liba couldn't laugh anymore. Oh, a gift from the governor of Liuzhou? When Wu Liba heard the news, he changed his mind. He was sure that Jiang Pingji had admitted defeat. She was using a gift to express her kindness. Wu Liba didn't show it on his face, but he smiled in his heart. He said, "Quickly present the gift." The gift was placed in a delicately shaped wooden box. There were exquisite and beautiful patterns around the box. It looked like a work of art. Seeing this, Wu Liba felt even more assured. He personally opened the box, and as soon as he lifted it a little, he smelled the stench of blood and decay. Wu Liba's expression changed. When he opened the lid and saw what was inside, his face turned ashen. Inside the mirror box was a set of exquisite glass headgear and a transparent bowl. Inside the bowl was a piece of rotten meat covered in coagulated blood. If it was a few years ago, such a set of glass headwear could be sold at the high price of hundreds of thousands of strings of coins in the northern borderline. Now it was so widespread and cheap that one set was not enough. With Wu Liba's knowledge, the piece of meat in the transparent bowl was clearly a human tongue. Wu Liba was praised as the sage of the northern borderline. Naturally, there was nothing to criticize about his intelligence. In an instant, he understood the meaning of the brocade box. Glass headwear. Everyone in the northern borderline knew that Wu Liba's wife was the young mistress of the northern borderline trading company. She loved to chase after luxury goods. A few years ago, when the colored glass of the heavenly palace appeared out of nowhere, Wu Liba's wife bought more than 10 sets. This act was talked about by the rich ladies of the northern borderline. Everyone thought that the colored glass of the heavenly palace was really expensive, but they didn't know that it was a scam. The Northern Borderline Trading Company Alliance and the rich ladies of the Northern Borderline were cheated of more than 20 million strings of coins by Gu Xian. Among them, Wu Liba's wife's family was the leader of the trading company. Because of this, they were unable to recover. Wu Liba lost the support of the Yu family and his position in the northern borderline was greatly affected. Even Wu Liba's political enemy, Harun Shah, often used this to mock him. The dignified sage of the northern borderline was schemed against by a businessman. Wouldn't he laugh his head off? Therefore, the colored glass of the heavenly palace had always been an indescribable pain in Wu Liba's heart. He hated to see this deceitful thing. As for the tongue, if a person's tongue was cut off, they couldn't speak. Wu Liba's visit to Dongqing was just to talk. Now he was hinting to him not to talk. Wasn't this a slap in the face? Of course, this was not the end. Lu Shi, I will return the humiliation you have suffered today double in the future, Wu Liba said with a serious expression. He waved his hand. Take it out and throw it away. Wu Liba suppressed his anger. Just as he was about to calm the raging flames in his heart, he suddenly saw something else in the brocade box from the corner of his eye. Wait, come back. He used his fingers to pick up the piece of paper that was pressed under the tongue and carefully unfolded it. After reading it, his anger surged and his vision flickered. I think your prince era is too noisy, so I specially sent it back, Lu Shi. This tongue actually belonged to the second prince. Wu Liba didn't have the time to care about the title Prince era. He only wanted to know who the owner of this tongue was. Lu Shi, how dare you humiliate us like this? Wu Liba was so angry that his blood pressure soared. His cheeks were flushed red, then suddenly turned purple. Fortunately, Wu Liba's psychological endurance was strong. His vision flickered for a while, and he actually recovered. Guards, Wu Liba panted heavily. His eyes were terrifyingly bloodshot. According to my orders, send someone to prepare a generous gift and send it back to Magistrate Liu. This fulfills the Central Plains custom of courtesy demands reciprocity. If it wasn't for the bigger picture, Wu Liba also wanted to use disgusting methods to disgust Jiang Pingji. However, as Feng Zhen had said, the main battle power was in Jiang Pingji's hands. The northern borderline had to serve them well. It wasn't that the northern borderline couldn't afford to fight, but the price of starting a war now was too high. Jiang Pingji received the generous gift from Wu Liba. She smiled and squinted her eyes. She liked it when her enemies couldn't do anything to her. In the end, they still had to flatter her, indulge her, and tolerate her. Lao Siji Lianmeng, sigh. The northern borderline is so unlucky. Why did they have to meet the streamer? Guikai Guo Fengxiu. If this was in a novel, the streamer would definitely be the top villain boss? Pia Pia Wiang. That's really hopeless. How big does the halo of the main character have to be? How strong does the immortal body have to be to defeat the Demon King? Ilan Yuge. The halo. It has to be at least 100 million in diameter, right? Poor Wu Liba. He doesn't have the halo of the main character, but he has taken on the task of defeating the Demon King. He's definitely going to be tortured. General Wu Liba, how have you been all these years since we parted ways in Shangjing? Jiang Pingji and Wu Liba had met once. At that time, he was high-spirited and arrogant. He forced Jiang Pingji to swallow the resentment in her heart. Now the situation was reversed. She, who was dressed in white, had become a vassal who ruled over a region. The domineering and arrogant Wu Liba had to respect her mood and carefully flatter her. Indeed, the wheel of fortune had turned. A trace of astonishment flashed in Wu Liba's eyes. He was shocked by Jiang Pingji's familiarity and even more surprised by her kindness. He had met Lu Shi before? Wu Liba couldn't remember the trivial matter from that time. Chapter 955. That year at Mount Ji's hot spring in Shangjing, Jiang Pingji stood up for Feng Jin. But Wu Liba stood up to stop her at the critical moment. However, with Jiang Pingji's bad temper, how could she let it go so easily? In front of Wu Liba, she chopped off the arm of the instigator from the northern borderline and slapped his face in front of everyone. Wu Liba might still remember the incident, but how could he remember that the arrogant youth was the current Jiang Pingji? He carefully considered Jiang Pingji's words and chose a vague answer. I've been living well these past few years. Thank you for your concern, Governor Liu. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, as long as you're doing well. She didn't dare to boast about other things, but when it came to holding grudges, if she was the second best, no one would dare to be the first. Back then, at Jishan's hot spring, Jiang Pingji wanted to press Wu Liba to the ground and give him a good beating. She wanted to punch his face. She had always remembered this debt. In the past, due to the circumstances, she could only watch as Wu Liba was arrogant and despotic. Now that the tables had turned, it was her turn to control the situation. Wu Liba saw that Jiang Pingji had a smile on her face and was concerned about his well-being. She did not seem to have any ill intentions. He was puzzled. He even doubted whether it was Jiang Pingji's own intention to give him a gift. Could it be that her subordinates had done it behind her back? If that was the case, it proved that Jiang Pingji's attitude towards the northern borderline was still neutral. There should be a possibility of persuasion. Thinking of this, Wu Liba secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The expression on his face also became lighter. As long as there was a chance, everything could be discussed. What he didn't know was that Jiang Pingji looked easy to talk to, but it was only because of her excellent acting skills. As the leader of a group of actresses, she must be the best of the best, the one who won all the Oscars. Wu Liba was organizing his thoughts when Jiang Pingji interrupted him warmly and invited him to have a meal together. Even if Wu Liba did not pay much attention to it, he knew that Wanzhou's gourmet house was famous for its delicacies. Gourmet house was established by Jiang Pingji. As you wish. He swallowed the words he was about to say. When the delicacies were served, the aroma of the meat made him salivate, and his appetite was greatly stimulated. Just the smell alone was enough to stir one's appetite. General Wu Liba was born in the northern borderline, and is a man of the grasslands. He should be used to eating horse meat, right? Jiang Pingji smiled and ordered someone to pour wine for him. Horse meat. Wu Liba took a bite. He did not know how the chef handled the meat, but it melted in his mouth, and the rich fragrance of the meat spread on the tip of his tongue. Even someone like Wu Liba, who did not care about his appetite, could not help but take a few more bites. It's a rare delicacy. Governor Liu, you're the lucky one. I'm afraid I don't have the fortune to enjoy it. It was indeed delicious. The meat was chewy and juicy. Based on Wu Liba's experience, this horse meat was definitely from a high-quality horse. However, the stud farm in Dongqing was controlled by the Meng family in Sangzhou. The master of the Meng family had also made it clear that he and Lu Shi had an irreconcilable feud. It was absolutely impossible for him to provide horses to Lu Shi. In other words, Lu Shi's horses were like gold ingots. Why would he slaughter them for food? In an instant, various thoughts flashed through his mind. For some reason, Wu Liba had an ominous feeling. General Wu Liba, how does it taste? Jiang Pingji asked him with a smile. Wu Liba said, the meat is chewy and delicious. I'm afraid it's a good colt. Jiang Pingji replied readily, that's natural. It's an excellent colt from the northern borderline. I was afraid that General Wu Liba would not be used to it, so I specially sent someone to the warhorse camp to slaughter an injured horse. Although it's an injured horse, it's healthy and has a good bloodline. It's also a good horse. She spoke naturally. The more Wu Liba listened, the darker his face became. The fragrance of the meat in his mouth seemed to have become poisonous, making it hard for him to swallow. The warhorse was brought by the second prince. Lu Shi purposely slaughtered a good colt from the northern borderline to entertain him. His evil intentions were clear. A stern look flashed in Wu Liba's eyes, but it quickly disappeared. Jiang Pingji asked, why aren't you eating? He replied, I'm old and my teeth are loose. I'm afraid I can't eat much. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint Governor Liu's good intentions. Wu Liba put the food aside and sat upright. I heard that my master's second son offended Governor Liu? Jiang Pingji continued to smile. Didn't you see General Wu Liba when he entered the city? Wu Liba was surprised. He did not know what she meant. Jiang Pingji continued, I forgot. With my memory, I'm always forgetful. In order to welcome General Wu Liba, I thought about it day and night, but I couldn't find a good gift. Considering that Prince Era missed his hometown, I allowed a part of his body to return. However, his injuries were severe. If his limbs were broken, he wouldn't live long, so I could only cut off his tongue. Prince Era's tongue was twisted a while ago. He's still recuperating, so I didn't hang him on the city wall to dry these few days. The second prince worked 8 hours a day. It was quite tiring. Now that the second prince's mouth was injured, Jiang Pingji naturally would not force him to work with his injuries. Wu Liba suddenly widened his eagle eyes. His eyes were filled with rage and ruthlessness. Governor Liu. Jiang Pingji lifted her eyelids lazily and said, "Yes, I'm listening." Wu Liba said, "Governor Liu, do you really have to be so ruthless?" Jiang Pingji smiled. "Ruthless? I don't think it's ruthless. Your prince from the north borderline brought 20,000 to 30,000 troops to attack Chongzhou. He tried to steal rations and burn down the granaries. I would like to ask, is this not ruthless? Once the 3 granaries of Chao Wu, Li Jiang, and Sang Emo are destroyed, the 100,000 elites in Chongzhou will starve to death. To put it bluntly, your lord allows his son to fool around and doesn't teach him to not steal. Don't blame me for teaching him how to be a man. General Wu Liba, are you here to plead on his behalf? 100,000 elites? 3 granaries could feed 100,000 elite soldiers?" Wu Liba extracted important information from Jiang Pingji's words. His face turned ghastly pale. Jiang Pingji's words were not polite at all. After careful consideration, it was extremely frightening. It was a clear threat. Wu Liba's heart raced. His mind was full of thoughts, but he remained unmoved on the surface. "Governor Liu, you've misunderstood. When my lord learned of this, he was furious. The second prince privately recruited 20,000 troops and was suspected of having disloyal intentions. Speaking of which, Governor Liu's action helped my lord to clean up his mess, and at the same time, prevented more conflicts." Wu Liba said calmly. "The north borderline and Dongqing are in-laws. The 2 countries coexist peacefully. The second prince tried to incite a war between the 2 countries. It was a move that hurt his heart. It is the second prince's good fortune that Governor Liu taught him a lesson. My lord sent me here, firstly to explain, and secondly for the people at the border." I didn't expect General Wu Liba to be such a righteous person. Wu Liba saw Jiang Pingji admit it shamelessly. He almost vomited blood. Chapter 956. You have to pay for what you've done. It hurts to slap yourself in the face. Today's single chapter was to explain what the author had posted 2 days ago. Of course, it had already been deleted to avoid causing a greater impact. Previously, Shitake had seen in the author's group chat that Baozi had plagiarized an idea starting with AW, and that it even involved an old history from several years ago. As for what old history it was, Shitake did not want to talk about it, for fear that it would only make things more troublesome. What he wanted to say was that it was Shirgu's fault for not seeking confirmation from the other party Bao. Without seeing concrete evidence, she decided on the matter on her own. Of course, it was also because they didn't clear up the past. Shitake's inherent impression of Bao was in a negative state, and her preconceived judgment was wrong. On Monday, the editor knocked on the mushroom. Only then did he realize what a stupid thing he had done. According to the editor, a screenshot of an insignificant author, like me having something to say, is even more popular than the 2 parties involved arguing. I'm scared to death. Therefore, Bao found Shitake and took out a screenshot of the evidence. The content of the screenshot was hard to say, for fear of charging money for taking up too much space. With Shitake's 250 IQ, he could prove Bao's innocence. His conclusion was that Shitake had been too impulsive and made a mistake. His body moved faster than his brain. Now he was sincerely apologizing for the content, that the author had something to say, hoping to redeem the damage that his previous words had done to Bao. Also, the waters in your circle are too deep. In the future, I will just be an onlooker. At the very least, I will think before doing anything. Smiley face, angle. Shanggu had originally intended to limit it to 400 words, but she didn't expect that the VIP would require at least 1,000 words. This put Shanggu in a difficult position. I'm afraid that not many readers will be able to read it if it's a public chapter. It won't make much of a difference if it's a standalone chapter. It's better to publish it in the VIP section so that more readers can read it. However, if he wrote 1,000 words and sent it out, he would feel like he was trying to scam people. Thus, he decided to make a small sum of money as compensation. Foreign. Zixiao, look at me. A familiar voice drifted into his ears, making him itch as if a feather was gently tickling his heart. Wei Xiai struggled to open his eyes. The glaring sunlight made him frown uncomfortably. Before he could see his surroundings clearly, his cheeks felt moist. Haha, are you still awake? Changsheng, help him wash his face. Wei Xiai subconsciously raised his hand and touched his face. It was covered in sticky saliva. Before he could react, a fair and round face appeared in front of him. Changsheng, who was more than 8 months old, could already babble. She held Wei Xi's face with both hands, opened her mouth and bit the tip of his nose. Wei Xiai could not help but laugh. He raised his arms and hugged Changsheng. His fair fingertips pointed at her little nose. Your nose is dirty. If you're hungry, look for the wet nurse. Changsheng chuckled and stretched out her 2 snow-white arms towards Wei Xiai restlessly. Sigh. Children are full of energy and mischievous. They're too naughty, Jiang Pingji lamented. Isn't it because my lord always indulges her? That's not good. It's precisely because Changsheng is young that the lord has to educate him well. Jiang Pingji smiled. Although I like children, I don't like to teach them. Wei Xiai muttered to himself. That's right, the lord herself likes to make a fuss. How can she raise the child? Don't raise a good-for-nothing second-generation ancestor. Fortunately, she has Zixiao. In the future, you will be her tutor. Yes, you will be the only tutor. Wei Xiai said disapprovingly. How can this be? Xi's skills are not good enough. I'm afraid I won't be able to take on heavy responsibilities. Tutors and teachers are different. Other teachers teach knowledge, but you as the tutor, teach her how to be a person. Wei Xiai did not understand. Was there a difference? Of course there was. In the future Jiang dynasty, the current empress was called Huichang. As everyone knew, the empress of the royal family was single. As the times developed, the people and the royal family, who were far away from the center of power and content with being a mascot, were constantly getting closer. As they got closer, there was more gossip. The people were very curious about one thing. The reporter asked. It's said that the women of the royal family will get pregnant if they have feelings. Is this true? Hui Chang said. Reap what you sow? No, it's fake. The reporter asked. So in fact there really are royal husbands? Hui Chang said. The title of royal husband is really. You must have read a lot of romance novels. Although there are no royal husbands in the royal family, there has always been a profession that has been passed down from generation to generation. Every emperor has a royal husband. The reporter asked, what? Hui Chang said, tutor of the crown princess. The people were shocked. Chapter 957. Wu Liba said calmly, ever since I ascended the throne, I have been restless. After many years of hard work, the people of the northern borderline were able to live a prosperous life. After that, my lord reluctantly married his beloved daughter, Princess Inyina, to the former emperor's second son. They became in-laws, hoping that the two countries could coexist peacefully. All these actions are just to appease the old grudges between the two countries, so that the people of the two countries can live in peace. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows slightly. She looked at Wu Liba with a spurious smile. Taking words out of context and distorting the truth were vividly displayed by the other party. In Wu Liba's mouth, the ambitious king of the northern borderline was not only a wise and brilliant ruler, but also an ambassador of peace. Wu Liba did not even have the slightest idea what kind of person his king was. You're really good at distorting the truth. Don't you want any face at all? Jiang Pingji did not speak, so Wu Liba continued. My lord heard that the second prince used automatic troops and offended the borders of Chongzhou. He was worried day and night and could not sleep well. If war broke out, not only would the people of the northern borderline suffer, the people of Chongzhou would also have to leave their homes and become homeless. My lord thought of this matter and took pity on the suffering of the common people of the two places. He specially sent an envoy, hoping to clear up the misunderstanding and restore friendship. Wu Liba spoke in a righteous and awe-inspiring manner. The viewers in the live streaming room were so angry that they wanted to explode on the spot. Hung you. Other things aside, Wu Liba's shamelessness is on par with our streamer. Meng Peng Bao Bao, Bullsh asterisk T. My streamer is shameless, that's called cunning and wise. Wu Liba is shameless, that's really shameless. Huang Xiaoyao's Wiguran. What a typical liar. Doesn't this old man's conscience hurt? Didn't he know how the people in the 3 cities of Shangyu had been living over the past few years? Didn't the streamer say that because the 3 cities of Shangyu are located at the border of the 2 countries, their trade is good, and they are one of the few prosperous cities in Chongzhou? Ever since it was robbed by those bastards from the northern borderline, he couldn't see what it had become. Jiang Pingji had used the 3 cities of Shangyu as a military stronghold and a springboard to attack the northern borderline. It was not only because of strategic military considerations, but also because the 3 cities had been severely damaged. If it were to be developed again, it was unknown how much effort, manpower, and financial resources would be needed. The 3 cities were basically 3 wastelands that harbored evil and accommodated the bandits and criminals of the northern border. Wasn't it the northern borderline's fault that the originally prosperous city had turned into such a ghastly state? Gu Mengmeng. That's right, Wu Liba is really disgusting. Let me make an analogy. It's as ironic as the Japanese who massacred the Chinese people during the war holding the World Peace Prize trophy. Anyone had the right to say that, but not Wu Liba, the barbarian from the northern borderline. Jiao Teng. Who asked Wu Liba to be the envoy sent by the northern borderline? Of course, he had to put gold on his face. Could it be that he had to tell the truth and admit that the king of the northern borderline was a bloodthirsty and warlike butcher? It was like a Japanese saying that he was a Japanese. It was impossible. Jiang Pingji raised her eyelids lazily and sneered. Become friends again? That's right. I hope that Lu Prefecture Magistrate will refrain from fighting for the sake of the people of the 2 regions. Wu Liba tried to appeal to his emotions. Wu Liba had learned from the Han culture of the Central Plains and liked to use peaceful means before resorting to force. It would be best if he could make Jiang Pingji agree to form an alliance by using her feelings. If the other party refused a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit and refused to agree, Wu Liba had other ways to deal with it. Jiang Pingji laughed involuntarily. What if I'm not willing? No matter how extravagant General Wu Liba's words were, the 3 cities of Shangyu had been in the hands of the Northern Army for nearly 20 years, and countless Han people had died. Was this the peace that the Northern Army's king had hoped for? I'm afraid it's hard to convince him. Wu Liba's expression did not change, but his eyes became sharper. He said, although I live in the northern border, I know that the Lu Prefecture overseer once gathered with the other 22 feudal vassals at the Huang River to form an alliance. Since then, the feudal vassals of Dongqing had been independent and only cared about their own interests. Does the governor of Liuzhou know that it is lonely at the top? Now that you are in a high position, who knows how many pairs of eyes are staring at you in the dark? This is a situation where tigers and wolves are surrounding you. If you let your emotions get the better of you and start a war between the 2 sides, no matter if Lu Prefecture's magistrate wins or loses, his vitality will be greatly damaged. When the sandpiper and the clam fight, the one who benefits in the end is the fisherman. Ceremony did not work, so they could only use troops. Wu Liba explained the key benefits and tried to persuade Jiang Pingji. He wasn't spouting nonsense. Jiang Pingji was the most powerful feudal vassal in Dongqing. If she started a war with the northern border, regardless of the outcome, her vitality would be greatly damaged. By then, who knew how many forces would bully her? If the enemy took advantage of the stalemate between her and the northern border and directly sent troops to attack both sides, what would happen? Lao Siji Lianmeng. What Wu Liba said makes some sense, but did he forget something? Jiang Pingji laughed and said, General Wu Liba, have you heard of a certain saying of the Han people? What saying? Those who are not of our race will surely have a different heart. Wu Liba's face suddenly turned green. Jiang Pingji sneered and said, if I start a war with the northern border, regardless of the outcome, my name will surely go down in history. Among the feudal vassals, as long as they have a bit of courage and don't want to go down in history, who would dare to take advantage of the situation? How can this be understood by the uncivilized barbarians of the wilderness? She mocked Wu Liba as an uncivilized barbarian in front of him. This humiliation was undoubtedly a harsh slap to the other party's face. It was intolerable. Lu Shi. Wu Liba slammed the table and stood up. His entire face had turned green. He could see that Jiang Pingji was determined to start a war. She was just toying with him. Wu Liba had been famous for a long time. When had he ever suffered such humiliation? The guards who heard the commotion swarmed in. One group stood in front of Jiang Pingji, separating her and Wu Liba. The other group surrounded Wu Liba. Jiang Pingji said, "I can hear you. You don't have to be so loud. I forgot to mention that we don't have the habit of not killing envoys in a war between two armies. General Wu Liba, please take it easy. If you really provoke me, you won't be able to return alive." After finishing her words, Jiang Pingji sneered and left. Wu Liba's mood had gone through ups and downs. He seemed to have aged a lot. Of course, Jiang Pingji didn't kill him. Instead, she packed him, and the people he brought with him, and threw them out. I'm afraid the war at the beginning of spring is unavoidable. Why? Is there anything in this world that you Feng Longzi are afraid of? Feng Zhen laughed. The time, place, and people are all present. Of course I'm not afraid. On the contrary, if I miss this opportunity, I'm afraid I'll become a sinner for all eternity. The Central Plains was divided. The foreign tribes were becoming more and more of a threat to the Han family. If they didn't take the opportunity to completely subdue them, when they made a comeback, it would be hell for the human world. Qiguan Rang waved his feather fan lightly and smiled. That's what I was thinking. Wu Liba was chased away by Jiang Pingji. The royal court of the northern borderline was furious. The king of the northern borderline was so angry that he almost had a stroke. Lu Shi doesn't know what's good for him. I'll let him know what's good for him. Sun Wen calculated the amount of hanshi powder that the king had recently consumed and the frequency of his rage. He felt that he could still put in more effort. Chapter 958. With the help of the fourth prince, Sun Wen successfully tricked the second prince and crippled the first prince. After that, he set his sights on the sixth prince. The fourth prince frowned. The sixth prince's mother is of noble status, and his maternal family is powerful. Why did he choose to deal with him first? Sun Wen said with a smile, "Forgive me for being disrespectful, but the king has been showing signs of aging recently. His anger has caused his health to deteriorate. If anything were to happen to him, the sixth prince could use the power of his mother's clan to ascend the throne. If that's the case, wouldn't all of our schemes end up benefiting him instead?" Apart from the sixth prince, the rest of the prince's forces were uneven. Only the fourth prince had a chance to fight. When the fourth prince heard Sun Wen speak of the king of the northern borderline in such a manner, he felt slightly uncomfortable. However, his inner ambition and thirst for power overwhelmed his father-son bond, allowing him to successfully ignore this little discomfort. The fourth prince bowed deeply and asked sincerely, "Please teach me." Sun Wen stroked his beard and smiled. "Your Highness, come closer." The two of them whispered to each other and discussed for a while. The fourth prince's eyes became brighter and brighter. A few days later, Sun Wen once again used a series of tricks. Not only did he trick the sixth prince, but he also made the king of the northern borderline fall ill from anger. "Father, I really didn't. You must believe me." The sixth prince cried like a man in tears. He had put up 1,000 defenses, but he still fell for his brother's evil scheme. "Father, someone must be framing me. I was raised by you personally. How could I do such a disgraceful thing?" The sixth prince knelt on the ground and cried. In the end, all he got was a sentence filled with endless anger. "Get lost." Not only did the king of the northern borderline not calm down, he was so angry that he wanted to kill his son. There was no other reason. This son actually took advantage of the time when he was sick and bedridden to hug his beloved beauty and clap for love on the ground. Listening to the conversation between the adulterous couple, he was so angry that he was about to ascend to heaven. It was popular in the northern borderline to transfer marriage. It referred to the marriage of a woman to her husband's brother, uncle, nephew, or the son of her husband with another woman after the death of her husband. If the king of the northern borderline died, his son would have the right to inherit his wives and concubines. But now he was not dead yet. His son and his stepmother were clapping for love, and they were still oblivious in front of his sickbed. The king of the northern borderline was so angry that his condition worsened, and he showed symptoms of temporary paralysis. The sixth prince, who had been caught, cried and wept, but he still could not stop the king of the northern borderline's killing intent. In order to survive, the sixth prince could only escape from the imperial court with the help of his mother's clan. He fled back to his fief and recruited soldiers. After a while, the sixth prince's attendant committed suicide and revealed that the sixth prince had been framed. After a series of messy investigations, the seventh and eighth princes turned out to be the masterminds. The king of the northern borderline could no longer be angry. He only felt his heart turn cold. The seventh and eighth princes cursed him with offerings, and he magnanimously forgave them. He had never imagined that his two sons were far more heartless and cruel than he had imagined. They had actually schemed against his other brothers in secret. Did they think that the throne would fall into their hands just because their brothers died? The seventh prince was close to the northern borderline's business. He had money and connections. The eighth prince was good at dancing and had a glib tongue. He got along well with many nobles in the northern borderline. Come to think of it, there were indeed many people who said that the eighth prince was very capable. It was really scary to think about it. The seventh and eighth princes received the news that very night. They followed the sixth prince's footsteps and ran away before the king of the northern kingdom caught them. As soon as they ran away, the king of the northern borderline was even more certain of his judgment. There were only 4 princes left in the northern borderline. As for the remaining 5, the second prince was in the Lord's hands. The eldest prince was deposed. The sixth, seventh, and eighth princes ran away to their respective fiefdoms. The division of the northern borderline had been mostly completed. Now only the finishing touches were left. Sigh. It's New Year's Eve again. I wonder how Lon is doing. The old man who stayed behind? Sun Wen missed his grandson. Did his grandson miss him? Before the end of the year, a special guest came to Chongzhou. It was Hanyu. Wenbin. Wei Xiai almost couldn't react when he saw Hanyu. Zixiao. Hanyu was full of smiles. He stepped forward and greeted Wei Xiai with his hands folded in front. Hanyu had shed the immaturity of his youth. He was a handsome young man in his mid-20s. He wore a high hat and a wide belt. Wei Xiai and Hanyu were both disciples of Master Yuanjing. They had a good relationship in private. When old friends met, the two had endless things to talk about. Wei Xiai was in high spirits and drank a few cups of sake. I really didn't expect Lu Lanting to be a woman. When I received the news that day, I almost thought I heard it wrong. In Hanyu's memory, Jiang Pingji was still a young boy who drove a group of horses along the banks of the Yishui River. Who would have thought that the bad boy who went upstream to wash his feet was now a female lord who dominated a region? The world made fools of people. Hanyu complained as he drank. He was not as cold as usual. Instead, he was a bit long-winded. Wei Xiai smiled bitterly. Hanyu was not the only one who was shocked. All the students of Langyi Academy were shocked. The two chatted about all sorts of things. The topic was related to the general trend of the world. Looking at the current situation, Lu Lanting is determined to fight against the northern borderline. Wei Xiai said, "The Lord has made up her mind. This battle is unavoidable. The northern borderline is a big threat. We have to get rid of it. Her temper is no different from before. If we fight against the northern borderline, we won't be able to take care of other places." Wei Xiai frowned and asked, "Wenbin seems to be implying something." Hanyu said, "The Meng family of Cangzhou has a deep grudge against Lu Lanting. How could they miss such a great opportunity? If it were any other feudal vassals, it was unlikely that they would take advantage of the situation. However, it was hard to say for the Meng family of Cangzhou." Wei Xi's face darkened. Hanyu had told him another piece of news. The Meng family of Cangzhou wants to form an alliance with Huang Song of Haozhou. Meng Zhan even proposed to give his adopted daughter to Huang Song as a concubine. Wei Xiai frowned deeply. In his previous life, Huang Song and the Meng family had formed an alliance to fight against the other feudal vassals. Huang Song married Meng Zhan's daughter. The father-son-in-law pair seemed to be close, but in fact they had their own agendas. After a series of battles and calculations, Huang Song finally annexed the Meng family's foundation. But in this life, Meng Zhan had never had a biological daughter. Instead, he had an adopted daughter. After all, Meng Zhan's first wife in his previous life was not Gu Zhen. Even though she's his adopted daughter, he's still willing to give her away as a concubine. Is Wenbin worried that Huang Song and the Meng family will join hands to harm my master? Han Yu said, "It's not impossible. As long as there were enough benefits, they could do anything. If forming an alliance with the Meng family could help Huang Song advance further, who wouldn't be willing to do such a profitable deal?" Wei Xi looked straight into Han Yu's eyes and asked, "Wenbin, are you here to urge Su Bei to form an alliance with my master?" He asked quite straightforwardly, and Han Yu did not beat around the bush. Of course, if the two families join hands, even if Huang Song and the Meng family are in cahoots with each other, we still have nothing to fear. When Han Yu arrived in Chongzhou, he did not go to see Jiang Pingji first. Instead, he bumped into Wei Xi to find out what was going on. Chapter 959. Huang Bogeo, I'll say it here today. If you let that Ming woman enter the mansion, or even touch a finger of hers, then the fate between us as husband and wife will end. From now on, the bridge is the bridge, the road is the road. You and I have nothing to do with each other. Lady Qi pulled out the dagger at her waist and stabbed it into the table. Huang Song was so frightened that he knelt on the ground and didn't dare to move. The more he acted like this, the more sad and uncomfortable Lady Qi was, and tears welled up in her eyes. Madam, if you have something to say, let's talk it out. Don't draw your knife so easily." Huang Song felt a headache coming on. Looking at the shiny blade, he didn't dare to provoke Lady Qi. "If you have something to say, then of course we should talk it out. But now, I have nothing to say to you." Lady Qi looked at Huang Song with slightly red eyes. Back then, because she liked him, she didn't mind his background and insisted on marrying him. Now that Huang Song was the prefecture overseer of Haozhou, he was much more powerful than her family. Even so, Lady Qi still had her own pride and persistence. The person she loved was Huang Song, who completely belonged to her. This Huang Song was her husband and the father of her child. If this person had a new lover and took another woman as a concubine, she would rather bear the pain and abandon him than share him with others. "Madam, you can't just let this matter go. What do you think? All men in the world are like that." "I'm the same." Madam Qi frowned and said angrily, "What are you? You are also an ordinary man. Do you want to have a group of concubines?" Huang Song was most afraid of this madam. He loved her and feared her at the same time. Seeing that she was angry, he quickly knelt behind her and massaged her shoulders and back. "Madam, I didn't say that I must have a second woman, but it doesn't matter if I have one in name. Otherwise, the reputation of being a henpecked husband will spread. How bad it will be. I promise not to hurt that woman. Madam, do you still not believe me?" Huang Song was speaking from the bottom of his heart. Before the Mengs proposed to send his adopted daughter, he had never thought of taking a concubine. He didn't even dare to look at the beauties that his subordinates offered him. The reason why he came up with the idea of taking a concubine was that it was profitable to cooperate with the Mengs. Wasn't it just an extra set of bowls and chopsticks, and a courtyard for a woman to live in? How big of a deal was that? If he could take this opportunity to form an alliance with the Meng family. Huang Songshao had been longing for the Meng's horse farm in Sangzhou for a long time. He had never imagined that his wife would be so angry that she would even bring up the matter of separation. Huang Song was so frightened that his legs went soft. I believe you." Huang Song's face lit up. Lady Qi sneered and added, "But I don't believe you." Huang Song was dumbfounded. "Madam, what do you mean?" Madam Qi continued to sneer. "If you want to take in a concubine, then can I raise a gigolo?" Huang Song said. "Madam, how can this be the same?" Madam Qi said angrily. She held the dagger to Huang Song's nose and roared. "How can it be different? Do you think I Chi Chaolan can't do what you Uncle Huang did? Lu Shi was able to become a marquis as a woman, and I have 3,000 elites under my command. Can't I do the same and start from scratch? When I become a marquis, why can't I have 3 husbands and 4 maids, and keep a house full of gigolos? Huang Bogeo, I have the support of my maternal brothers, and I have a famous master. I have learned the art of war from my father since I was a child. If it weren't for the limitation of being a woman, I would have joined the army by now. Do you really think that I am a woman guarding my own backyard? Do you think I can do it or not? Madame Chi's aura instantly soared to 2.8 meters. Huang Song sat obediently on his knees. Madam, I really didn't mean to touch that woman. I just wanted to take this opportunity to test the Meng family. They hold the lifeline of the horse farm. It's really for official business, and there's no love between a man and a woman. Huang Song hoped to persuade her with reason and emotion, but Madame Chi was very emotional and clear-headed, so she was not moved at all. She said mockingly, "Hearing you say that, you sound very aggrieved?" Huang Song said, I dare not. I'm not aggrieved. My husband is a man of indomitable spirit, not a cocky rabbit." Huang Song's face was livid, as if he was constipated. He smiled bitterly and said, "Madam, why do you say that? For the sake of the Meng family's interests, you have to reluctantly marry a woman from the Meng family. Isn't this a shady business of selling yourself?" Huang Song was about to refute, but when he saw his wife's fierce expression, he didn't dare to say anything. Besides, the Meng family is a sly old fox. If you hang out with him, it's still unknown who will swallow who. Huang Song said timidly, "Madam, even if you don't believe me, you should believe in my group of advisors. How can they be easy to deal with?" Madame Chi snorted coldly, her expression cold. "In short, as long as I am alive, no second woman is allowed to live in my room or sleep in your bed. If you dare to have one, I will abdicate and wait for your letter to release my wife. I will wait for your may madam live for 1,000 years and get married again." When a man and a woman separated peacefully, the man would write a letter to release his wife to the woman, and at the end he would write, "May madam live for 1,000 years and get married again," to show his blessing. After that, Madame Chi swaggered away, leaving Huang Song with a headache. "Alas, Lanting has really made me suffer." Huang Song touched his forehead. When he had just told his wife that he wanted to take a concubine, Madame Chi had directly used violence and beaten him so badly that he couldn't fight back. The daughter of a tiger from a family of generals was really terrifying. With this kind of combat power, even 3 to 5 big men might not be able to control her. "It's all your fault." Although Madame Chi and he were of the same mind, he couldn't stop her from being infatuated with Lu Shi, a role model for women. A woman had become a mighty and all-powerful vassal in the north. She had seduced his wife to pick up the knives, spears, swords, and halberds that had been abandoned for several years, and used them vigorously. After all, Madame Chi didn't play with these things after she got married. For the sake of her idol, she picked up martial arts and made great progress after some hard training. It wasn't that Huang Song didn't want to fight back against the domestic violence just now, but that he had no room to fight back at all. Lanting, you really made me suffer." Huang Song took the bronze mirror and looked at himself. The bruises on his face were obvious, and there was a big bump on his forehead. How could he face others? Looking at the rouge and makeup on the dressing table, Huang Song recalled the process of his wife putting on makeup and tried to use it to cover up the traces of domestic violence. A quarter of an hour passed. Looking at the ghost in the mirror, Huang Song almost vomited from disgust. After carelessly wiping off the rouge, Huang Song left home with a wretched look on his face. He was going to find a few strategists to have a good discussion. As soon as he went out, he bumped into Cheng Jing and Feng Ju, who had come to visit hand in hand. Huang Song was speechless. He was the Lord. He still needed to save face. Cheng Jing and Feng Ju were speechless. They had come at the wrong time. The Lord and the other two looked at each other, and the atmosphere was awkward for a moment. Feng Ju asked, "Lord, have you convinced the first madam?" Chapter 960. Feng Ju sighed. Although Cheng Jing frowned, he did not say anything. It was an expected result. Huang Song's wife was also a resourceful woman. She was different from other unmarried women. Their lord never avoided this madam when discussing matters. Sometimes, he would even listen to her suggestions, which showed how much he loved and respected her. Cheng Jing said, "In that case, we can only think of another way." The master of the Ming family was as cunning as a fox. He was ambitious and would do anything to achieve his goals. He was not an easy person to deal with. Rather than being on guard against his schemes in the future, it's better not to associate with him from the start. Huang Song frowned and said, "If we don't agree, won't we become enemies with the Meng family?" The Meng family of Zhangzhou was really not to be trifled with. Huang Song's wings were growing, but compared to the big shots like the Meng family of Zhangzhou, he was still a little inexperienced. If the two sides were to form an alliance, Huang Song would have to bear a certain amount of risk, but the benefits would definitely be great. If they rejected the alliance, it would be equivalent to pushing the Meng family into a position of opposition, creating an enemy for no reason. Now he could only listen to what his two trusted advisors had to say. Cheng Jing said, "Has my lord ever wondered why the Meng family would suddenly form an alliance with us at this critical juncture?" Huang Song shook his head. It was hard to guess the thoughts of the Meng family of Zhangzhou, and he had never studied them. Cheng Jing said confidently, "I'm afraid they have ulterior motives. They allied with us because they were worried that we would help Lu Shi. In fact, he even hopes to use our military strength to restrain Lu Shi's main force. If that's the case, the Meng family is not a match for us." Huang Song was stunned. What does this have to do with Lanting? The Meng clan wants to destroy Lu Shi, Feng Ju reminded him. If the Mengs wanted to destroy Jiangpingji, when would be the best time? Of course, it was when the war between her and the northern borderline was at a stalemate, and she didn't have the spare energy to watch over the rear. Huang Song frowned and said angrily, "How dare the Meng family do this? Wouldn't I become a traitor who betrayed the righteousness of the nation?" Cheng Jing said coldly, "The Mengs secretly sold Maras to the northern borderline. He even did such a thing. Why would he be afraid of being charged?" Huang Song thought about it, took a deep breath, and made a decision. If that's the case, there's no need to consider forming an alliance with the Meng family. He had a premonition that his friendship with Jiang Pingji wouldn't last long. Sooner or later, they would have to fight each other. War was war, and righteousness was righteousness. He would never help a tyrant do evil. Feng Ju smiled. "Although we can't ally with the Meng family, we can ally with Lu Shi and fight them together." Huang Song said with a bitter face, "Lanting can't even take care of herself. Just the northern borderline is enough to make her anxious." Cheng Jing said confidently, "Jing and Huaiji mean that we will help Lu Shi delay the Mengs. Once she has settled the northern borderline, we will destroy the Mengs." Huang Song was speechless. Why did the two strategists say that his friends who spent their days drinking and having fun with him were so awesome? That was the northern borderline, not cabbages. How could they be chopped at will? Feng Ju smiled bitterly. He took out a secret report from his sleeve and handed it to Huang Song. "Your Highness, you'll understand once you read it." Huang Song took it and read it. His eyes widened. What did he see? The situation in the northern borderline was actually this chaotic? The imperial court was divided, and the princes who had escaped went to develop their own tribes, while the princes who had yet to leave fought with each other until they were cross-eyed. It was taboo to split up within a force, not to mention a nomadic tribe like the three tribes of the northern borderline. The regime of the northern borderline used the imperial court as a link to connect the forces of the various tribes, twisting countless ropes into one. Only then did they gather a terrifying combat power. If all the tribes were divided, their combat power would be greatly reduced. This is an unlucky year for the northern borderline. First came the horse plague, then came the civil strife. How could they fight against Lu Shi, who had been preparing for years? Although the combat power of the northern borderline cavalry was off the charts, the combat power of the elite infantry might not be able to defeat the disorganized cavalry. Cheng Jing said confidently, "It's not an unlucky year. Someone must be secretly obstructing us. As for who the person is, it's obvious." Huang Song was so shocked that he bit his tongue. The civil strife in the northern borderline is the result of someone's scheme? Cheng Jing nodded. As for who the person who stirred up trouble in the northern borderline was, he had not yet caught him. It was no wonder that Cheng Jing could not catch him. Sun Wen had been a slave when he entered the northern borderline. Later, he became Herench's secret confidant, and would not appear in front of others easily. When he gave advice to the 4th and 9th princes, he was also very careful. Who could suspect him? Some people in the northern borderline also realized that there was something wrong with the atmosphere recently, but Sun Wen was too cautious. They could not catch him by the tail. Huang Song sighed. If there's really someone, it must be someone from Lanting. The person who benefited the most from tormenting the northern borderline at this critical juncture was Jiang Pingji. I'm also relieved to ally with Lanting. Compared to the Mengs, Jiang Pingji made Huang Song feel more at ease. Although Jiang Pingji was a little deceitful, she was also a person who paid attention to morality. She would not casually stab her allies in the back. Even if she did, she would inform them before doing so. Sigh. I can finally answer to Madam. After talking about business, Huang Song heaved a long sigh of relief. He could not help but complain to his strategist. This woman is really not to be provoked. After this incident, even if Huang Song was given 10 times the courage, he would not dare to mention the word, take in a concubine. He added, especially a woman who knows martial arts. Feng Ju could not help but laugh. He said, My lord, you should go back and comfort the first madam. The grape trellis at home had collapsed. Why didn't he quickly help it up? Huang Song walked briskly to coax his wife. He threw out all kinds of sweet nothings, and begged his wife for mercy while holding the 2 children. Only then did Madame Chi's heart recover, and her anger turned into joy again. On the other side, the 2 strategists were also surprised by their mistress's temper. Feng Ju turned his head and said to his wife, My lord has taken in a concubine, and your mansion is about to be overturned. This wife was not chosen by the Fangs. It was Huang Song's wife who acted as his matchmaker. After their marriage, the 2 of them got along well. Chalon's temper has always been so unyielding. It's not surprising. Lady Feng Ju's appearance was not outstanding, but her temperament was extremely gentle. She could be said to be synonymous with gentleness and virtuousness. Fortunately, there is Lu Shi. Without him, I'm afraid the Lord will be laughed at. For a man, henpecked was not a good reputation. Even without this person, Chalon will still make trouble. In the end, it will most likely be a peaceful separation. Too many men used ambition as an excuse to let women down. Some women would endure it, and some would rather die than live in dishonor. Chi Chalon was the latter. It was not that she was stupid. On the contrary, Lady Chi was too smart. If you took in a concubine once, there would be a second time. Every time you took in a concubine, you would make trouble and compromise. Sooner or later, the sweetness between husband and wife would be worn away, and they would eventually become bitter couples. She would not give Huang Song a second chance to let her down. If Huang Song dared to take in a concubine, she would definitely separate if she said she would. If she separated, Huang Song would think about it for the rest of his life, and it would eventually become an obsession. She would always have a place in his heart. She let the beauties go back and forth around Huang Song, and no one could replace her. Feng Ju held her hand and joked with a smile. Madam, do you know Madam so well? What if I also want to take in a concubine? Lady Feng Ju glared at him, slowly pulled out her hand, and crushed the teacup on the table with a faint smile. Husband, give it a try? Chapter 961. The alliance between the Lu, Su and Huang families not only made the feudal lords and forces in Dongqing uneasy, but the northern borderline was also in turmoil. Other than external factors, the internal affairs of the northern borderline were also full of hidden dangers. First, the 9 princes of the northern borderline plotted against each other. Then the king of the northern borderline's health deteriorated, like a river declining day by day. Cough, 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 come. Bring my medicine over. Frequent consumption of Hanshi powder, in addition to frequent outbursts of anger, almost drained the king of the northern borderline's body. How was he still the majestic king now? He was clearly a dying male lion, weak and frail. His sharp teeth could not even bite through the skin of his prey. How could the king of the northern borderline accept such a situation? The more it was so, the more he relied on the state he was in after consuming hanshi powder. His mind was clear and his body was full of energy, as if he had returned to his strongest and youngest days. He shouted for a few times. Only after a while did his beloved concubine enter the room. What happened outside? Why did you come so late? Ever since he consumed hanshi powder, the king of the northern borderline's temper became more irritable. He would vent his anger by killing the slaves when he was unhappy. He raised his hand and waved the tray, fiercely pinching his beloved concubine's wrist. His eyes were wide open. His heavy breathing came out from his nostrils onto his beloved concubine's face. "Spare me, my king! Spare me, my king!" The beloved concubine begged pitifully. "Tell me." The king of the northern borderline held on for a while. He laid back down exhausted, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Tell me." The beloved concubine seemed to be used to the king's violent temper. She knelt on the ground to clean up the remains and changed a new set of medicine. After consuming large amounts of hanshi powder, the king of the northern borderline was immersed in a wonderful state. A carefree yet sly smile appeared on his face. The beloved concubine at the side saw the situation. She only shivered, as if she fell into an ice cellar. She watched for a while, until the king's chest calmed down. Then she carried the tray and retreated. The moment she left the main tent, her waist was suddenly tightened. Before she could scream, her mouth was covered by someone. The beloved concubine blushed. Ninth Highness, not here." The king of the northern borderline's beloved concubine reminded him. "Ninth Highness, do you still remember the sixth prince?" The king of northern borderline's favorite concubine reminded him. "Your Highness, do you still remember the sixth prince?" When the ninth prince heard about the sixth prince, he immediately lost interest and pushed the woman away with an ashen face. It's really unlucky to mention sixth brother at this time. The sixth prince thought that the king of the northern borderline was seriously ill, and the throne would fall on his head. So he held the king's beloved concubine, and did whatever he wanted in front of the bed. He didn't expect that the king of the northern borderline would wake up at this time, and fiercely attack the sixth prince, almost killing him. Learn from the mistakes of others, and learn from the mistakes of others. The ninth prince could not fall into the same trap. It's better to be safe than sorry. We still have a long way to go. There's no need to rush. Compared to the ninth prince, who was willful and outstanding, this concubine was much calmer and saw things more clearly. There's no need to be so careful. Now, apart from number 4, who else can threaten me? The ninth prince sneered as a fierce look flashed across his eyes. Fourth sister, do you really think that Sunwin is doing his best to help you? He and Harensha are both my people. He's just using you as a target to sweep away the enemies on the surface." The concubine said. "Aren't there still the third prince and the fifth prince?" The ninth prince sneered and said disdainfully. "The two of them? Although they share the same mother, they don't get along, and have been fighting ever since they were young. The third prince was also unlucky. This person studied under Wu Liba. Logically speaking, he shouldn't be in such a miserable state. Unfortunately, he had a traitorous younger brother, the fifth prince. The death of Zhang dragged the third prince down, and his reputation in the court plummeted. In order to prevent losses, the third prince could only lay low and plan for the future. However, the fifth prince was unwilling. He caught the other and bit him, treating his brother from the same mother, as if he was his father's murderer. The two brothers fought so fiercely, Sunwin even pushed them from behind, and easily knocked them out of the game. Now, of the 9 sons of the northern borderline, only the fourth prince, whom Sunwin assisted on the surface, and the 9th prince, whom he secretly supported, were left. "Thank you for your plan, sir." The fourth prince had been very successful recently, and gave all kinds of rare treasures to Sunwin. He and the 9th prince shared the same mother, but the 9th prince had never been adopted by the queen. He was only the son of a female slave, and had a very lowly bloodline. In the fourth prince's eyes, the 9th prince was not a threat. The throne of the northern borderline was already in his hands. Sunwin smiled and said, "The fourth prince is favored by the heavens. I'm just following the will of the heavens." These words made the fourth prince's body and mind feel good. He said, "When I ascend the throne, I hope that you will continue to assist me to unify the northern borderline and fight against the traitor Liu." Ascending the throne didn't mean that he could rest easy. His other brothers had all returned to their respective tribes, and were all great troubles for him. Sunwin smiled and said, "That's natural. I will definitely sacrifice my life for the fourth prince." The fourth prince was overjoyed at his loyalty. He held Sunwin's hand and refused to let go. Sunwin's schemes were unparalleled. If he could wholeheartedly assist him, he wouldn't be afraid of his brothers, let alone the covetous Liu Shi. As long as the ninth prince was eliminated, he would be the next king of the northern borderline. Sunwin frowned and warned, "The fourth prince can't let his guard down. Although the ninth prince is not as good as the fourth prince, he is still the youngest, and the king loves him the most. The ninth prince usually hides behind others, and lets others take the blame for everything. I don't know how many connections he has secretly accumulated. The fourth prince should be more cautious in case he takes the opportunity to force the king to abdicate and act first." The fourth prince's expression turned serious, and he said seriously, "Thanks to your advice, I almost got carried away." The ninth prince was usually quiet, but he was the youngest son, and was loved by the king of the northern borderline. All the good things were given to him. After so many years, who knew what trump cards the ninth prince had? A few days later, the fourth prince received a secret report from an informant. The ninth prince was gathering troops to force the king to abdicate. There were only 2 princes left in the imperial court. The ninth prince must have felt the pressure and couldn't wait to act first. "Sir, what should we do? The ninth prince is really going to force the king to abdicate. According to the king of the northern borderline's love for the ninth prince, he might really hand over the throne to him." Sunwin comforted him. "The fourth prince is not in a hurry." "Why not?" The fourth prince said eagerly, "My plan has removed all the obstacles. Do you think it will be all for the ninth prince?" Sunwin said with a smile, "The fourth prince is not in a hurry. This is a ready-made weakness." As soon as he said this, the fourth prince was immediately comforted. "Sir, you are right." The fourth prince came back to his senses, his heart beating wildly. The ninth prince really made a bad move. The ninth prince couldn't bear the pressure, and brought troops to force the king to abdicate. This was a stupid move made when there was no other way out. If he won the bet, the king of the northern borderline's position would fall to the ninth prince. If he lost, the fourth prince would be the final winner. Sunwin suddenly frowned and asked, "The fourth prince, is this news true?" The fourth prince said, "Of course it's true." Chapter 962. Night fell, and the breeze on the grassland brought with it a bone-chilling temperature, like fine knives scratching people's faces. Tonight's atmosphere was particularly heavy, and almost every patrolling guard's face was tense. In the middle of the night, the Imperial Guards changed shifts again. This time they were all new faces. The fourth prince wore a full suit of armor, with a big knife hanging at his waist. He looked like the king of the northern borderline. Dressed like this, he looked majestic, like a lion patrolling its territory. "Has everything been arranged?" he asked his confidant patiently again. "What time is it now?" The confidant said, "It's just midnight, and there's still a quarter of an hour before the ninth prince's appointed time." A quarter of an hour? The fourth prince felt that every second was like a year. Seeing that his long-cherished wish was about to be fulfilled, he couldn't even wait for a quarter of an hour. "Check everywhere again. We must make sure that nothing goes wrong." He paced back and forth, and seemed to think of something. He called his subordinate back. "Where's Mr. Sun?" At such an important moment, he hoped that someone would witness it with him. If Sunwin was there, he would feel more at ease. In the fourth prince's mind, this strategist who played with the political situation of the northern borderline was miles ahead of the wise men of the northern borderline. The confidant said, "Mr. Sun said that he was old and couldn't bear to see blood, so he went back." After hearing this, the fourth prince's mouth twitched. He didn't know what to do with Sunwin. He forgot that Sun Wen was a weak scholar who couldn't carry anything with his hands or shoulders. If a bloody battle broke out later, no one could guarantee his safety if he stayed here as a scholar. So it was better that he didn't come. Let him be. Anyway, the general situation had been decided. It didn't matter whether Sun Wen was there or not. The fourth prince was a suspicious person, so he couldn't help but go to the king's tent to see that the king of the northern borderline was still in bed. Time passed, and it was finally the appointed time. The fourth prince's heart beat like a drum, and he became more and more nervous. However, why was there no one? Several confidants came to report that all the checkpoints were guarded by their own people, but they didn't see the ninth prince's people at all. What was going on? This ninth prince, did he have too much fun with his wife, so he was late? The fourth prince murmured to himself. He didn't dare to slack off. He ordered his men to guard the various checkpoints. He couldn't let his guard down. After the appointed time, the people who had been highly nervous gradually felt tired. The fourth prince clenched and unclenched his fists. Finally, he could not help but want to get up. He hadn't even taken 2 steps when he faintly heard the sounds of killing. His eyes widened in joy. However, before the smile on his face faded, dozens of his subordinates rushed in, covered in blood. The one leading them was his trusted aide. "Your Highness, we've been tricked, let's go." His confidant's words made the fourth prince's heart skip a beat, and an ominous premonition filled the air. "Wait, what do you mean?" The fourth prince supported his trusted subordinate subconsciously. The special rattan armor on the man's body had been cut by the sharp blade. His flesh was exposed and blood was flowing out. He said emotionally, "What do you mean by we've been tricked?" The confidant raised his hand and tied a piece of cloth around his waist to stop the wound. The guards who rushed in from the outside firmly protected the fourth prince. Just as his subordinate was about to explain, the shouts were getting closer and closer. The fourth prince saw that his private army, which he had carefully trained, was losing ground. As they retreated, they left behind several corpses. The enemies outside were menacing, and the fourth prince could only lead his men to fight and retreat until they were near the king's tent. The fourth prince's confidant was a man from the northern frontier. His face was stained with blood, and his eyes were slightly red, almost crying. "Your Highness, there's no coercion at all. We've been tricked." Even a fool could see that something was wrong, not to mention that the fourth prince was not a fool at all. There's no coercion. If there's no coercion, if the ninth prince had not coerced him, then he would have used his power to transfer the guards of the king's tent and replace them with his own people. Wouldn't that be? After a fierce battle, the fourth prince's thousands of elites were killed by 80%, and the rest were also defeated soldiers. Seeing that they were about to be forced into the king's tent, suddenly hundreds of executioners rushed out of the king's tent and cooperated with the pursuers to stop them. The fourth prince's thoughts turned quickly, and he vaguely guessed something. He was so angry that his molars creaked. He had fallen into the ninth prince's trap, watching the people around him die one after another. But the enemies were increasing in number and getting closer and closer. The fourth prince was powerless to reverse the situation. "Fourth brother, I really didn't expect you to do such a crazy thing, forcing the emperor to abdicate and commit patricide." The shouts gradually subsided. There were corpses and broken limbs all around, and the ground was muddy with blood. The air was filled with the smell of blood. The fourth prince stared in a certain direction, and the crowd that surrounded them parted to reveal a familiar figure. "The person who forced the emperor to abdicate and commit patricide is obviously you." The fourth prince clenched his molars in anger, and he was so angry that his eyes were about to crack. "Fourth brother, it's already like this, and you still want to lie with your eyes open?" The ninth prince laughed contemptuously. One by one, the ministers of the imperial court stood behind him and looked at the fourth prince with complicated gazes. Some were disappointed, some were angry, some were indifferent, some were shocked, but no one trusted him. "You changed the guards near the king's tent and secretly replaced them with your own people. You even wore armor and carried a sword, and you dare say that you didn't rebel?" The ninth prince sneered. "I received the news early in the morning. I didn't believe it at first, But I didn't expect that fourth brother would really do it. With so many people seeing it with their own eyes, what else does fourth brother have to say? If you hadn't come early, fourth brother would have forced father to make you the crown prince, right? The fourth prince felt a chill. The ninth prince said again, if fourth brother didn't have any rebellious intentions, why did you kill my people when you saw them? The fourth prince retorted, I received the news that you wanted to abdicate and commit patricide, so I specially arranged for people to stop you in advance. The ninth prince looked up to the sky and laughed, tears almost coming out of his eyes. The other ministers of the northern borderline could not bear to look at him and turned their faces away. They didn't know whether the ninth prince had any rebellious intentions, but they saw the irrefutable evidence that the fourth prince wanted to abdicate and commit patricide. Now that he was caught, he didn't repent, and instead found such a lame excuse to quibble. The ninth prince sneered, fourth brother, you can't do this even if you slander your younger brother. You'd better say this in front of father. The fourth prince felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. He looked at the ninth prince with some horror in his eyes, as if he didn't know his younger brother. Fourth brother. The ninth prince walked up to the fourth prince. The others had already been subdued, and the fourth prince was also tied up like a dumpling. Bah! The fourth prince spat at his face. Fourth brother, don't be angry. The ninth prince raised his hand to wipe away the spit in a good mood, and stuck it on the fourth prince's face, distorting his facial features. He pinched the fourth prince's chin with his other hand and sneered. Do you know how you lost? The fourth prince suddenly opened his eyes wide. That's because fourth elder brother treated my trusted aide as his own aide. Sunwen is your man. Chapter 963. The king of the northern borderline, who had finally fallen asleep after taking the tranquilizer, woke up from his nightmare. He smelled blood. Someone, what's going on outside? He had a nightmare. He dreamt that someone was holding a knife to kill him. When he woke up, he smelled the thick smell of blood in the air. He was terrified and quickly called for help. After calling for a long time, there was no one until the ninth prince, dressed in plain clothes, lifted the curtain and entered the tent. He smiled and knelt down respectfully. Father, fourth brother brought people to force the king to abdicate. Now he has been captured by me and a group of ministers, waiting for your judgment. The king of the northern borderline took a long time to digest this news. His chest seemed to be blocked by something. His eyes dimmed and he fainted. The ninth prince smiled, his eyes flashing with a cold light. Although the king of the northern borderline did not die, he suffered a stroke. Other than his eyeballs, which could still move, he could not move. The fourth prince, who forced the king to abdicate, committed suicide. Whether it was suicide or not, only the ninth prince knew. He finally had a taste of power. Finally, he did not have to pretend to be stupid to win the king's favor. He could show his talent. Where's Mr. Sun? After dealing with various matters overnight, and killing the remnants of the fourth prince, the ninth prince finally remembered the greatest hero, Sunwen. If not for this person's plan, how could the ninth prince defeat his 8 ruthless brothers and have the last laugh? Sunwen and the ninth prince had very little contact. The two only got together because of Harench's cover. The ninth prince did not believe Sunwen's suggestion to use the fourth prince, and was always guarded against him. Now that he saw the benefits that the other party brought him, he no longer doubted it. If he could not use such a good talent, he could not keep him. I don't know. Forget it. When I have settled things, I will personally go to ask for your forgiveness. In his heart, it was naturally more important to stabilize the power in his hands. Everything else had to wait. Anyway, Sunwen could not run away. In fact, not only did Sunwen run away, he ran very fast. Cough, cough, cough. Can you slow down a little? This old man can't stand the jolting. Sunwen saw that the time was right. He secretly transferred his earned property and ran away with Wei Si's trusted caravan. As soon as he got on the carriage, Sunwen regretted it. The jolting of the carriage made him hurt all over. The coachman was also helpless. They were in a hurry and had to return to Chongzhou in the shortest time possible. There was no time to waste. Although they didn't know what Sunwen had done in the northern borderline, They didn't dare to slight him, since the higher-ups thought so highly of him. The coachman said, "Sir, please bear with it a little longer. You'll be fine once we reach the border." Sunwon was an old man who had suffered a lot. He couldn't bear hardship. Sigh. This old man's small body is going to fall apart. Sunwon thought about what he had done in the northern borderline all these years, and could only grit his teeth and bear with it. No matter how bumpy it was, he could not complain about being tired. If they were captured by the northern borderline, dismemberment by 5 horses would be considered a light punishment. Even burning their bones and scattering their ashes would not appease their hatred. The caravan did not dare to cause any trouble, so they secretly smuggled Sunwon out of the northern borderline under the cover of the goods. They had been doing business all year round, and had already bribed the entire border of the northern borderline. It would not be a problem for them to smuggle someone in. Sunwon's face was pale as he looked at the impregnable border, but his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. It was great that he had returned alive. Sunwon had been in Jiangpingji's camp for a few years, but he had never seen his lord. It was rather strange. "Allow me to take a bath and wash up first, lest I offend my lord." Sunwon spoke in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. Jiangpingji arranged for Sunwon to live in a spacious house, and a quick-witted servant. Sunwon revealed his identity. The middle-aged man who looked like a housekeeper bowed with his hands folded in front. "Your servant greets my lord." "Grandfather." A familiar, heavenly voice assaulted his eardrums. Sunwon had just entered the inner court when a figure in blue and white rushed into his arms. "Io, grandfather's darling Lon Lon." Sunwon took a small step back to protect his grandson. He still felt like he was in a dream. "Lon Lon, weren't you in Wanzhou? Why did you come to Chongzhou?" Sunwon hugged his grandson and looked at him intently. His grandson, who had been thin and tanned, had now grown into a cute and mellow figure. One could faintly see his future elegance from his facial features. Fortunately, his grandson looked like his son when he was young. Otherwise, Sunwon would not have been able to recognize him. "Let grandfather see." Sunwon was so excited that tears streamed down his face. Grandfather's grandson has grown taller, fairer and fatter. Sun Lon was a little shy as he pinched his sleeves and said, "Lon or Mrs. Grandfather, the academy is on holiday, so grandson begged Fingy to come with me to Chongzhou." "Fingy? Who's that?" Sunwon was startled. "A friend I met in Wanzhou. He's also my classmate." Sunwon was relieved. He was willing to be enslaved and blackmailed by Wei Ci, so that his grandson could grow up safely and happily. Sun Lon had gone to the academy to make friends. Even his shy and reserved personality had become a little more cheerful. This comforted him greatly. "However, you came with that Fingy. 2 little kids came all the way from Wanzhou to Chongzhou?" Sun Lon smiled and shook his head, revealing a few missing teeth. "Fingy and Jinghui's fathers are both in Chongzhou. They haven't seen their father for many years. They came to see their father. I also miss grandfather, so after asking I came with them." Sunwon frowned. He could already tell that Fingy and Jinghui's parents were not simple. "Who is Jinghui?" It sounded like the name of a little girl. Sun Lon lowered his head and shyly moved closer to Sunwon's ear. "She's my classmate." Sunwon knew that his grandson was studying at the Golden Scale Academy. The teachers there were almost all famous scholars, and the academy's faculty was strong. Sunwon could not be more satisfied with this arrangement. It seemed that Sun Lon was well taken care of in Wanzhou. His efforts in the northern borderline were not in vain. As they were talking, 2 children, one tall and one short, came out of the house. The tall one was a boy about 10 years old. He was young but already had a graceful bearing. The short one was a girl. Although she was young, she had a good demeanor. Her eyes were clear and lively. No one knew which family she was from. Sun Lon introduced them. "Grandfather, this is my classmate, Fingy, and this is Qiguan Jinghui." "Greetings." Elder Sunday Fingy and Qiguan Jinghui bowed to Sunwon at the same time. At that moment, Sunwon noticed the 2 children's surnames. Feng, Qiguan. Sunwon had never met Jiangpingji, but he had studied her background. With a glance, the 2 children in front of him were the children of Lu Shi's capable advisors. If his grandson interacted with them more, it would only benefit him more. He was old, and he did not know how many years he could live. If Lan Lan could build a good relationship with the people around her, she could take care of her in the future. However, before he died, he would do his best to build a career. This would be his grandson's capital. Thinking of this, Sun Wen's hand secretly brushed the front of his shirt. The inner shirt was a little thick. If one did not touch it carefully, one would not notice it. He had sewn an extremely important item inside, and secretly brought it out of the northern borderline. Chapter 964. Lan Lan, these two classmates of yours are pretty good. Get along well with them in the future. Don't throw a tantrum. To put it more realistically, Feng Yi and Qiguan Jinghui were the second generation of power. If Jiang Pingji developed further, they might become the pillars of the next generation. Now that they had established a good relationship, would they still need to worry about not having a guarantee in the future? In the past, Sun Wen doted on his grandson and could not bear to impose the secular thoughts of an adult on his child. After the big change, he had no choice but to change his mind. He was already in his 40s. In a few more years, he would be an old man. Who knew how long he would be able to accompany his child? If he passed away, Sun Lan would truly be alone in this world. She would no longer have any relatives to rely on, and could only rely on her friends. Sun Lan nodded sensibly. I know, Grandpa. I will get along well with Jinghui and the others. And be good. Sun Wen used his calloused hands to caress his grandson's tender little face, full of gratification. Come. Grandpa will test Lan Lan to see if you have studied well. Sure, Grandpa, go ahead. Sun Wen was in charge of Sun Lan's education. Even when the two of them were at their most difficult times, he did not slack off on Sun Lan's education. He knew that his grandson was young, so the questions were not difficult, but his grandson's performance surprised him. Grandpa's sweetheart is Lan Lan. The student has surpassed the master. You are much smarter than your father. Sun Wen was so happy that his eyes lit up. A smile blossomed on his face as he praised his grandson generously. He himself was a typical late bloomer. When he was young, it was extremely difficult for him to learn. His son was also slow and slow-witted, and didn't seem to have much talent in learning. When it came to Sun Lan's generation, Sun Wen was also worried. Could it be that this child was also mediocre in intelligence? After the Enlightenment, reality gave Sun Wen a huge blow. The slowness of a lineage of inheritance. Learning everything was strenuous. He did not despise his grandson for being stupid. He was just worried that Sun Lan was too mediocre and would be easily bullied in the future. If that wasn't the case, Sun Wen wouldn't have risked his life to accumulate merit points. He only hoped that Jiang Pingji would treat Sun Lan well in the future on account of his great contribution. However, his grandson had given him a great surprise. This kind of surprise gave him a greater sense of accomplishment than scheming against those idiots in the northern borderline. Sun Lan lowered his head. His face was flushed from the compliment, and he inadvertently revealed his cute canine teeth. There are still many things I don't understand. I need to study harder. Sun Lan was not arrogant. Instead, he reflected seriously. It couldn't be helped. Feng Yi, the top student, was swaying in front of him. With Sun Lan's basic foundation, she couldn't be arrogant in the Golden Scale Academy. Yes, that's right. You're not arrogant in victory, and you're not discouraged in defeat. You're worthy of being my good Lan Lan. Sun Wen patted his grandson's hair and said, If there's anything Lan Lan doesn't understand, you must ask and think more. Don't be afraid of being laughed at. Understanding is the most important thing. Sun Lan's personality was like that of her parents. She was shy and introverted. Sun Wen was worried that the other party would keep his questions to himself. That was not a good way to learn. Lan, double quotes Lan. Lan nodded. Lan said. Lan, Feng, Lan, he the. Sun Wen smiled. Sure. Tell me. Lan ran into the house and brought out a few books. Sun Wen frowned. The only reason was that the books Sun Lan used were all made of precious Xian paper, which was as precious as gold. This was not studying. It was burning money. He opened the book. His grandson's notes were written on the clean paper. Sunwon felt his fingers tremble. He was not holding a book. He was holding a pile of gold. He could not help but be envious. If he had such a good learning environment as his grandson, he would not have to wait until he was in his 40s to achieve anything. Sigh. Sunwon sat on the porch. He opened the book with one hand and hugged his grandson with the other. What are the questions? The questions that Sun Lan could not solve were child's play for Sunwon. The answers were at his fingertips. Sunwon enjoyed Sun Zao's starry eyes. He smiled, which was rare. Grandpa, you're amazing. Sun Lan was not stingy with her admiration. Sunwon was overjoyed. It was as if he had eaten a peach from the Queen Mother of the West. Lan Lan wants to be as amazing as Grandpa. She must study hard in the future. Sunwon looked at the sky. He held his grandson's hand and went to the main hall for dinner. Seeing his grandson eat every grain of rice, Sunwon felt gratified and sad at the same time. He was glad that the hard times were over. Their lives would be better in the future. Yes, he and Lan Lan could only live a better life when the Lord reached higher heights. After coaxing his grandson to sleep, Sunwon got up to get a lamp. He took off his shirt and used a pair of scissors to cut open his shirt and took out the contents. He had read the contents over and over again countless times and was already familiar with them. He sat there until dawn. After washing up, he changed into a new set of clothes and tidied himself up from head to toe. Just as he was about to leave, his grandson was already ready. You're up so early. Why don't you sleep a little longer? Sun Lan said, I have an appointment with Fengyi and the others to do morning exercises. 2 carriages were parked outside the door. A familiar head popped out of the curtains. Good morning, Mr. Sunday. The one who spoke was Qiguan Jinghui. Fengyi was old-fashioned. He wouldn't do something as rude as sticking his head out of the curtains. She got out of the carriage gracefully and Fengyi bowed. Sunwon secretly raised his eyebrows. He heard that Fengyi's father, Feng Zhen, was a complete wastrel. Now that he saw it, the rumors couldn't be trusted. Yes, Jinghui. An unfamiliar voice came from the carriage. It sounded stern. Qiguan Jinghui was so scared that he shrank his neck and quickly stuck his head back. Father. Sunwon heard the voice and guessed. The man in the carriage must be Qiguan Rang. The curtains of the other carriage opened, revealing a slightly gloomy and thin man's face. He looked at Sunwon and invited him with a smile. You must be Sunwon, Mr. Sun Zaidao, right? Zixiao was worried that you wouldn't know the way, so he asked us to bring you along. Jiang Pengji built houses wherever she went. Most of them were used to speculate on real estate, and a small portion was used to reward her subordinates. Sunwon's neighbors were Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen. Thank you for your hospitality. Seeing that Feng Zhen treated people warmly, Sunwon's impression of him improved. Only Qiguan Rang secretly sneered. Feng Zhen was a drama queen. He was addicted to acting. The children went for a morning jog, while the 3 adults went to the government office together. Sunwon met his lord for the first time. Chapter 965. Sunwon bowed in a serious manner. Your subject, Sunwon, greets my lord. It was rather uncomfortable for him to bow to a woman who was a few years younger than his own son. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, Zaidao, you must be tired from the journey. Did you sleep well last night? Sunwon's expression did not change, but he felt indescribable in his heart. How many years had it been since someone called him that? Very well. Thank you for your concern, my lord. Although Jiang Pingji could not do such a thing, she would not mistreat her own people. As a nouveau riche, she had always been extremely generous. Sunwon had not yet arrived in Chongzhou, but she had already prepared a large number of rewards. Zaidao has worked hard and made great contributions. It was not easy for him to return safely from the dangerous northern borderline. Today, I should hold a banquet to welcome you. Sunwon said a few humble words before thanking her. Today was not only Jiang Pingji's first time seeing Sunwon, but it was also the first time the viewers in the streaming room saw the legendary Prince Charming Grandpa Sunday Chihua Jiqiu. Hey, I thought Prince Charming's son was very old, but he's clearly a middle-aged uncle. Sunwon lived a happy life in the northern borderline. From his appearance, he did not seem to be much different from his age. He was clearly a man in his early 40s, at the age when his charm was at its peak. But he was already a grandpa. How could the superstar celebrities, who had only gotten married and become fathers in their 50s, endure this? The Fairy Queen's crimson. Thumbs up. You are indeed a streamer who has a face complex. You gather handsome men, and none of them are ugly. It was not that Sunwon was good-looking. His facial features could only be considered a straight face, but with his temperament, his charm increased greatly. Temperament was something that could not be touched or seen, but it definitely existed. Zueyun Cat Yao. To the commenter above, if you say that Chi Kwang and the rest will be heartbroken. Mingxing Zhu. Congratulations to the streamer for obtaining another think tank. Yinuagia Zhugachinmo. A group of superficial fans. Am I the only one who noticed that a storm is brewing? Guikai Guo Fengxiu. Sunwon is a multifaceted spy that Wei Ci sent to the northern borderline. Now that he has returned safely, it means that the situation in the northern borderline has reached Wei Ci's initial expectations. Perhaps the northern borderline is already crippled. The streamer can sharpen her knife to conquer the northern borderline after spring. Big shots were big shots. Their questions always went straight to the heart of the matter. The idle spectators could only join in the fun. Just as the big boss in the streaming room analyzed, Jiang Pingji's sword was hungry and thirsty. She introduced Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang to Sunwon. On the surface, the three of them seemed to be getting along well. Jiang Pingji had already decided to let the three of them and Wei Ci lead the battle at the north borderline. The other strategists would guard the rear to resist any possible sneak attacks. She wasn't worried about Wei Ci, but she was worried that Feng Zhen and Sunwon wouldn't get along. From the looks of it now, she no longer had to worry. She inquired about the situation in the north borderline in detail, and Sunwon answered them one by one. After a while, Sunwon stepped out of the ranks, raised a brocade box with both hands, and said in a clear voice, "I have something to offer my lord." Jiang Pingji took it with a smile and opened the box. There was a thin piece of paper inside. Seeing Jiang Pingji take it with her bare hands, someone in the audience sent a bullet scream. Yi Wu Yin Ling. If the paper was smeared with poison, it would be a miracle. Sunwon is probably the most successful super spy. As it turned out, a brain hole was still a brain hole. Jiang Pingji took out the piece of paper and carefully unfolded it. A complete map of the north borderline was drawn on it. Sunwon said, "This is the map of the north borderline. On it are the locations of each tribe, the oases, and the general distribution of their military forces." His words shocked Feng Zhen so much that he jumped up. Qiguan Rang's reaction was still considered calm, but he also tightened his grip on the handle of his fan. The map of the north borderline? Good, good, good. Jiang Pingji was overjoyed. She said good 3 times in a row. She smiled and said, "Zidao is indeed my Lu Shang." In order to attract Wei Ci's attention, Sunwon had called himself Lu Shang. Now that he had received such an evaluation from Jiang Pingji, he didn't really boast too much. The streaming room was also in an uproar. Yusue Jiao, my prince son is amazing. You can be called the strongest 007 of the generation. Even 007 is not as good as you. How could he not be good? He was ordered to go undercover in the north borderline in the face of danger. Not only did he play the north borderline in the palm of his hand, but he also took away their war secrets after he escaped unscathed. He was so good that he could fly to the sky and stand shoulder to shoulder with the sun. Feng's remembrance. I've decided. Idol Sun is my idol. I'm going to be his fan. Taste of chili sticks. Does Sun Lon Lon still need a grandmother? A large wave of fans swarmed toward Sunwon. In an instant, his popularity shot up to the top, easily establishing his position in Jiang Pingji's heart. Ancient communication technology was backward, and information and intelligence could determine the outcome of a war. It could be said that whoever had the advantage of intelligence would be the dominant party in the war. Sunwon bowed in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, and returned to his seat. He looked calm, but he was actually overwhelmed with emotions. He was so excited that his palms were sweaty. He had achieved the effect he wanted. He had not wasted the huge risk he had taken to steal the intelligence. Just this contribution alone was enough to guarantee Lan Lan a high position and wealth for the rest of her life. Parents loved their children, and they had far-reaching plans. His grandfather was the same. He was Lan Lan's last closest relative in the world. If he did not plan for Lan Lan, who else would take care of this poor child? Feng Zheng was speechless. He secretly asked Qiguan Rang, where did Wei Zixiao find such a demon? What kind of late bloomer was this? Whose late bloomer could be so terrifying? Didn't you say that Sun Zidao came looking for them himself? Qiguan Rang replied in a low voice. I should say that the Nye family of Zhengzhao provoked a demon. No matter what, it's beneficial for us. With Sun Wen's help, it's not impossible to conquer the northern borderline. From Wei Xi, they knew that Sun Wen had fallen to such a state because of the Nye family of Zhengzhao. If Sun Wen was really an ordinary old man, it would have been fine, but he was a late bloomer. He could easily plot against the Nye family. Little did they know that Sun Wen was supposed to be the most intelligent person in the Nye family's camp. Feng Zhen secretly broke into a cold sweat for the Nye family. Based on Sun Wen's determination to plot for his grandson, he must have cherished his family very much. The Nye family had destroyed his family. If he had the chance, would Sun Wen let go of his enemies? Absolutely not. Although she had received the confidential documents, Jiang Pingji did not immediately gather people to discuss military affairs. Instead, she sent people to prepare a welcoming banquet. Sun Wen had just arrived. He knew no one but Wei Xi, but that did not prevent him from quickly becoming familiar with Feng Zhen and the others. Smart people always had a lot to talk about, even if Sun Wen was a generation older than Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang. After chatting for a while, Sun Wen realized that he was wrong. He had thought that Feng Zhen was a warm and gentle gentleman, but after getting to know him up close, he turned out to be an unrestrained and free-loving wastrel. Could he have a bit of the moral integrity of a drama queen and put on a full act? Eating, drinking, gambling, and smoking. Was there anything that he did not know how to do? How did a father like this raise a good seedling like Feng Yi, who was elegant and dignified? Sun Wen's mind came up with a very appropriate sentence. Chapter 966. Not strong enough. Again. Jiang Pingji held the wooden sword in her left hand and wore a playful smile on her face. She was thick-skinned enough to bully the kids. Hey, did you not eat your fill this morning? Or do you not feel like eating lunch? Are you trying to tickle me with your soft strength? She casually blocked with her wrist, and with a little force, she easily pushed away the little radish head who was sweating profusely and exerting all his strength. No. Are you going to fight and kill the enemy or kill them? If you miss, you'll be in a passive position. Jiang Pingji bullied the kids. The audience in the streaming room felt sorry for them. Tiatada, streamer, you've fallen. Can't you bully the northern borderline? Why do you have to pick on 3 kids? Mo Xingyo. That's not bullying, is it? She used the sword with her left hand, and her feet never left the ground. Akateris, hehe. Not to mention using a sword with your left hand. Even using one of your fingers is considered bullying. Yamada-miya. Don't worry about it. I think it's cute when the 3 kids kill themselves one after another. Jiang Pingji ignored the comments on the screen. She smiled at the 3 children, who were bending over and panting. You still won't admit defeat? I won't. She wanted to ask where Wei Xi was, but she saw the 3 kids practicing swordsmanship with wooden swords in the yard when she left the government office. The 3 kids were familiar. They were Qiguan Rang's daughter, Feng Zhen's son, and Sun Wen's grandson. Although they were young, their swordsmanship was decent. Jiang Pingji had nothing to do, so she personally taught them. Well, it was a one-sided killing with a mental attack. Qiguan Rang's daughter was panting. She used the small wooden sword in her hand to support herself on the ground. She bent over slightly and blushed. Sun Wen's grandson was so tired that he was in tears. He bit his lower lip and shook his head when he heard Jiang Pingji's provocation. Feng Yi was the best. He looked weak, but he maintained his composure. He would rather breathe quickly than open his mouth to catch his breath. They're so young, but they're all stubborn. Why do you hold it in when you're tired? Jiang Pingji sighed with emotion. She put aside the wooden sword in her hand and waved at the three children. Come here. I'll take you to the kitchen to find some delicious food. Jiang Pingji was the master of the three children's elders. They did not dare to disobey her and followed her obediently. When a few parents ran over to look for their children, they happened to see their lord happily instructing three dusty children to barbecue. Feng Yi had a serious expression on her face. She was roasting well. Sun Lan was flustered and her face was stained with some unknown sauce. Qiguan Jinghui, on the other hand, was more leisurely. She was mainly in charge of carrying firewood and starting a fire. Chapter 967. Although the Lord Ziwei Emperor's qi had been increasing, if the thief had not stolen it, her fate would have been even more vigorous. Wei Xi was worried at the thought of this. In order to clarify the truth, he sent letters to several hermit masters. Master Liaochen did not leave Hejian County, and the other masters were in seclusion. He only caught Jinren Liuru. Wei Xi did not dare to guarantee the level of the others, but Jinren Liuru was half his teacher, and a role model in the world of charlatans. Jinren Liuru smiled as he cleaned up the chessboard. Young friend, you are not in the game. You can just watch from the sidelines. Why are you upset? Wei Xi shook his head and said, although I am not in the game, the most important person in this life is in deep trouble. How could he stand aside and watch from the sidelines when the Lord was in deep trouble? Jinren Liuru smiled and said, infatuation in the world of mortals. Wei Xi had an embarrassed look on his face, as if his thoughts had been seen through. Young friend, please forgive me for being rude. You have already jumped out of the 3 realms and 5 elements. You have a great opportunity, and the Emperor's qi to protect you. Why are you still in the world of mortals? Why not follow me to seek immortality and seek the Tao? You are free and unfettered. Jinren Liuru tried to coax Wei Xi to become a monk with him. It was a waste of such a good seedling to fight and scheme against each other. Wei Xi sighed. What's the use of being outside the world of mortals? But my heart is in the world of mortals, and is tied to that person. Jinren Liuru was cruelly fed a mouthful of dog food. He said, since you have made up your mind, it is not good for me to break you up. Wei Xi wanted to explain, but Jinren Liuru said, I read your letter carefully and know something. Wei Xi bowed and asked, Jinren, please enlighten me. Jinren Liuru shook his head regretfully. He said, I only have one suggestion for this matter. Let nature take its course and do not interfere. Wei Xi was puzzled. That evildoer stole the fate of the nation and the emperor's qi of others. How much sin did he commit? Jinren, why? Dongqing suffered from frequent natural disasters, and many people suffered because of it. It was all because the fate of the nation was stolen. Jinren Liuru said, it is for the sake of the common people that you should let nature take its course. Wei Xi wanted to get to the bottom of it. He said, please enlighten me, Jinren Huanqing. Your master Lu Shi is the chosen child of heaven. If there are no accidents, she will be the ruler of the world, right? Although it was a question, Immortal Liru said it in a declarative tone. The evildoer who stole the country's fate and the emperor's aura have a great fate and bond with your master. As for who he is, I can't tell because my cultivation is too shallow. I can only say that both of them will suffer. Wei Xi's eyes widened. How could this be? According to Reverend Liru's words, that demon couldn't be moved? Things will eventually sort themselves out, and the boat will naturally straighten itself out when it comes to the bridgehead. Young friend, you don't have to worry too much. This lord of yours has an extraordinary background. This tribulation is just a hurdle. It'll be fine once he gets over it. Enlightened Liru smiled as he comforted Wei Xi. Since he's the ruler of the world, he has to go through hardships. Your master isn't an ordinary person. I'm afraid she already knows the identity and background of the demon, and is secretly planning something. Wei Xi said dumbfoundedly, I wish I could take his place. The unknown was the scariest. How could he not be worried when faced with these problems that didn't exist in his previous life? No matter how Wei Xi tried, Enlightened Liru refused to reveal more information. It was really annoying. After 2 days, Wei Xiai prepared to leave. Enlightened Liru Ru saw him off for a kilometer. Before leaving, he suddenly asked, "Young friend, do you know of Zhuang Sheng's dream of a butterfly?" Wei Xiai didn't understand. He said, "In the past, Zhuang Zhou dreamed of a butterfly. It was vivid and lifelike, but he didn't know Zhou." Suddenly, he realized that it was Zhou. Didn't he know that Zhou's dream was butterfly and butterfly's dream was Zhou? Is this the story you're talking about? Enlightened Liru Ru sighed. Yes, Zhuang Sheng dreamed of a butterfly dreamed of Zhuang Sheng. Young friend, remember this. Wei Xiai was stunned. What did this mean? What was Enlightened Liru hinting at? Without waiting for him to think carefully, Enlightened Liru Ru said, "I observed the sky last night. The emperor star shone, and the north was auspicious. Young friend, you can rest assured." Wei Xiai returned with a stomach full of doubts. However, according to Enlightened Liru Ru's instructions, the Lord had the ability to deal with that demon and should be safe. Even so, Wei Xiai still felt uneasy. Why would the evildoer who stole the fate of the nation and the emperor's aura suffer together with his lord? He desperately wanted to return to her side. Only by seeing her well with his own eyes could he be completely at ease. Wei Xiai did not know that not long after he left, Enlightened Liru's chest throbbed, as if he had an ominous premonition. He calculated with his fingers, and his expression changed drastically. He quickly packed his luggage and ran off to travel. Taoist Master Liru had only left for half a day when a group of black-clothed men pounced on him. These people were not willing to give up. They searched the inside and outside of the thatched cottage, as if they were looking for something. If Xie Qian were here, he would realize that Reverend Liru was the mysterious master who gave him the yin yang jade pendant. At the same time, after Wei Xiai returned and heard that Sun Wen had successfully completed the mission, he temporarily put these questions to the back of his mind. The most important matter now was still the northern borderline. As for the rest, they could talk about it later. "Greetings, my lord." As soon as he returned, he went to see Jiang Pingji. "Zixiao, you're back from visiting a friend?" Jiang Pingji asked. "You don't look worried. Did something difficult happen to you?" Wei Xiai restrained his unnecessary expression and said, "Thank you for your concern, my lord. I'm fine." "That's good." Jiang Pingji did not expose him. Instead, she asked the kitchen to prepare lunch for Wei Xiai, and sent someone to invite Qiguan Rang and the others. Zidao completed his mission beyond expectations. He also brought back a map of the northern borderline, as well as the locations and approximate military strength of the various tribes in the northern borderline. With these, our chances of winning against the northern borderline will be greater. Since Zixiao is back, the war against the northern borderline should also be put on the agenda. Wei Xiai widened his eyes in astonishment. He knew that Sun Wen was very powerful. Otherwise, he would not have been able to suppress a group of young talents and secure his position as the top strategist of the Nie family. However, he did not expect Sun Wen to be so good at playing the dirty game. He played the northern borderline in the palm of his hand all by himself. After Wei Xiai finished his meal, Qiguan Rang and the others arrived one after another. Jiang Pingji said, "I'm sure everyone knows why I've summoned all of you here today. The three tribes of the northern borderline have been eyeing the central plains covetously for a long time. If not for the horse plague, which caused a great loss in their military strength, I'm afraid they would have already sent their troops south. They are full of ambition. The central plains is divided, and the feudal lords are fighting each other. It is difficult to guarantee that the northern borderline will not take this opportunity to launch a sneak attack. As the governor of Wanzhou, I am in charge of Chongzhou. I will definitely be the first enemy to be eliminated by the northern borderline. As the saying goes, the one who strikes first gains the upper hand. Instead of waiting for the northern borderline to recover, it is better to take the opportunity to start a war and take their lives." Chapter 968. The three tribes of the northern borderline were nomadic tribes, living in tribes for generations. Because of the characteristic of living by water, the mobility of the three tribes of the northern borderline was far greater than that of the farming tribes of the central plains. For this reason, the cohesiveness of individual tribes was very strong, but the cohesiveness between tribes was very poor. Most of the time, the tribes in the northern borderline would have fierce disputes over the ownership of a certain pasture, and it would even evolve into regional wars. The tribes of the northern borderline were like a sheet of loose sand. Even if they were terrifyingly aggressive, they still could not pose a substantial threat to the central plains. They were just scattered sand. What was there to be afraid of? The appearance of the northern border imperial court made up for this flaw. A long time ago, the northern border didn't have an imperial court. There were only 3 extremely powerful tribes. One generation had an ambitious successor. This person took the lead as the leader of the tribe, and the other 2 tribes responded. The 3 tribes joined forces to conquer the other tribes in the northern borderline. While fighting and plundering, they devoured their territory and population. After the unification, the imperial court was established in the northern borderline. The 3 major tribes agreed that the 3 tribes would take turns to be the king of the imperial court. This system was implemented very well at first, but the other 2 tribes were weakened because of the natural disaster, and their right to speak became smaller and smaller. In the end, the northern borderline royal family was the only one in power. The northern borderline royal family was thick-skinned and simply changed the system of taking turns to be the banker to the next generation. The forces in the northern borderline were in turmoil, splitting and reuniting. Until today, the current king of the northern borderline, with the help of Wu Liba, had become the true leader of the resurgence. If not for the sudden arrival of the equine plague, perhaps the iron hooves of the northern borderline would have already trampled on the land of the central plains. Although the appearance of the imperial court had become the glue between the various tribes, the characteristics of the nomadic tribes hadn't changed. The people of the northern borderline were still used to living in tribes. Sun Wen saw through this, so he used a scheme to sow discord among the princes, causing unrest in the political situation of the northern borderline. Other than the 4th prince, who committed suicide to escape punishment, and the 2nd prince, who was about to be sacrificed to the flag, the other princes of the northern borderline were scattered all over the northern borderline. Their actions further tore apart the harmony within the northern borderline, making it difficult for the troops everywhere to integrate. The northern borderline was like a hemp rope. If they worked together and exerted their strength in one direction, the combat power they could unleash could change the color of the sun and moon. If this hemp rope was divided into a dozen strands, an ordinary strong man would be able to break it with a single tug. It was no longer a dream to break through the northern borderline's defense line one by one. Jiang Pingji praised Sun Wen mercilessly. Not only did she praise him verbally, but she also rewarded him generously. Firstly, Sun Wen had made great contributions. He was worthy of this honor. Secondly, Sun Wen showed off his abilities as soon as he arrived. If Jiang Pingji did not back him up, there might be people who would make fun of him. The greater the power, the more complicated the personnel, and the higher the probability of conflict. Jiang Pingji didn't expect them to love each other. She just wanted them to do their jobs well, and not be a burden to each other. She had been plotting against the northern borderline since she was 12 years old. Now, she had a strong army and sufficient provisions. Everything was ready except for the arrival of spring. Although it was said to be a discussion, the few of them gathered together to analyze the actual combat power of the northern borderline and various ways to deal with various emergencies. Sun Wen successfully entered the A-list and was doing very well, but the northern borderline was in an uproar. This could be traced back to a period of time ago. The 9th prince was the big winner, who had the last laugh, and he could be said to be proud of himself. The old king of the northern borderline suffered a stroke, and the powerful minister Haluncha supported him with all his might. The 9th prince naturally became the crown prince and held great power. The taste of power is intoxicating. The 9th prince enjoyed it for a few days, and finally remembered that he hadn't seen Sun Wen for a few days. He went to visit him personally, but Sun Wen's tent was empty. Before he left, Sun Wen deliberately set up a diversion and tried to delay as much time as possible. "Where is he?" The 9th prince was dumbfounded. Although he didn't have much contact with Sun Wen, he had already relied on him for his divine strategy. The northern borderline still needed his assistance. His subordinate reported that not only was he gone, but Sun Wen's tent had also been violently rummaged through. Everything valuable was gone. It seems like it was done by the horse bandits, the subordinate said awkwardly. The ninth prince's mouth twitched. He said, horse bandits? Why would there be horse bandits at the place where Mr. Sun lives in seclusion? The subordinate said, but where Mr. Sun lives, there are indeed horse bandits causing trouble. The northern borderline had a vast territory, and horse bandits ran amok. Not only were the borders of Chongzhou deeply disturbed, but the herdsmen in the northern borderline also deeply hated horse bandits. These horse bandits didn't dare to attack the big tribes. At most, they would wander around the borders of the tribes. Sun Wen's identity was special. To reduce his presence and prevent others from noticing him, he asked to stay at the borders of the tribes. There were few people there, and it was hidden, so it was not easy to be discovered. The ninth prince understood everything and gritted his teeth. Find him. Even if I have to dig 3 feet underground, I have to find him. If he's alive, I want to see him. If he's dead, I want to see his corpse. He was still counting on Sun Wen to help him stabilize the imperial court and balance the various powers. After a deeper understanding, the ninth prince realized that the salted fish Herentia could make a comeback because of Sun Wen's meticulous planning. In other words, if Sun Wen was gone, Herentia's value would be greatly reduced. What use did he have for a salted fish? With Sun Wen's disappearance, the horse bandits in the northern borderline suffered. Dozens of horse bandits' nests were wiped out. However, no matter how many horse bandits' nests were wiped out, they couldn't find Sun Wen's whereabouts. At the same time, a few princes who had escaped to their fief rubbed their palms together, wanting to force the imperial court to hand over its power. This gave the ninth prince a headache. Have you found him? The ninth prince was also in a frenzy. The pressure from the imperial court and his brothers was almost crushing his spine. No. The subordinate who reported timidly said in a low voice. Trash, why aren't you going to find him? The ninth prince panted heavily. He lifted his hands and swept everything he could touch to the ground. As time passed, some people suspected that Sun Wen might not have been kidnapped by the horse bandits, but that he had run away. However, this reason was simply a joke in the eyes of the ninth prince. Sun Wen tried his best to help him rise to power, helping him get rid of one obstacle after another. He was about to succeed, so why would he run away? It didn't make sense at all. As time passed, no matter how unwilling the ninth prince was, he had to admit that something had happened to Sun Wen. Without Sun Wen's advice, how could the ninth prince deal with the sly old fox and his aggressive brothers in the court? The more forceful he was, the more it would rebound. At that moment, the northern borderline received a declaration of war against the northern borderline from Chongzhou. To a certain extent, it helped the ninth prince attract all the attention. This was the second declaration of war from Jiangpingji. Compared to the first warning, the wording this time was much harsher. It was a completely incompatible attitude. The ninth prince said this at the court meeting. The officials were in an uproar and everyone was anxious. Does anyone have a plan to deal with it? The ninth prince sat on the throne and looked around. The officials who met his gaze lowered their heads and closed their eyes, not daring to look him in the eye. Chapter 969. The ninth prince looked at the officials who were talking about him in court, and felt very annoyed. If it was Mr. Sun Wen, he definitely wouldn't be vague or evasive. What was the use of keeping these useless people? Why don't we send someone to sue for peace? The northern borderline was very poor now, and couldn't afford the funds needed for war. When the time came, wouldn't they have to take military funds from the various tribes? The group of nobles was also used to living a luxurious and peaceful life. They ate, drank, and played and didn't want to fight at all. If war broke out, it would hurt their interests. Who would be willing to fight? The ninth prince was so angry that he laughed. The war hadn't even started, and the people below were already thinking about how to sue for peace. Were they still the people of the northern borderline? Sue for peace. Why don't you send someone to wag his tail at Lu Shi and beg for mercy? The ninth prince's temper flared up, and he directly scolded that person. Before the horse plague in the northern borderline, they were still sharpening their swords and preparing to send troops to the central plains. It had only been a few years, and a group of officials wanted to negotiate for peace without even fighting a war? The official was scolded by the ninth prince, and his old face turned green and black. Although he didn't flare up in court, he remembered it and directly hated the ninth prince. Acting king, in my opinion, this war can't be avoided. If we talk about peace now, it will undoubtedly help the others and diminish our own prestige. An old northern borderline official stepped out and said, "The most important thing now is to reorganize the troops and prepare to face the enemy." This old official said a bunch of nonsense, but it was better than talking about peace. The ninth prince also wanted to take this opportunity to take back the military power of the various tribes. The official's words were exactly what he wanted. That makes sense. The ninth prince said, "There is a strong enemy outside. The entire northern borderline should work together to fight against the enemy." A few of his brothers ran to the fief and gathered troops. It was obvious that they wanted to pull the acting king down from his throne. How could the ninth prince let them do as they wished? He might as well take back the military power in their hands while they were at war. Without the military power, no matter how capable his brothers were, they wouldn't be able to cause much trouble. The ninth prince's abacus was very loud. He knew that the northern borderline royal court was short of finances, but a lack of money was one thing, and a war was another. The cavalry's strength was greatly reduced, but the infantry's strength was still there. The three tribes of the northern borderline could fight on and off horses. The warriors fought fiercely, tyrannical and fearless. From the ninth prince's point of view, Jiang Pingji's decision to attack the northern borderline was akin to shooting herself in the foot. The northern borderline was not even afraid of Dongqing, so why would they be afraid of a small feudal vassal of Dongqing? Hitting a rock with an egg was extremely foolish. The ninth prince's plan was brilliant, but little did he know that the actual execution of this plan was fraught with difficulties. He knew that he could use this opportunity to take back his military power, but how could his brother not know what he was planning? Don't think that he's the only smart person in the world. Once he gave up his military power, he would be like a tiger without its teeth and claws. In the future, his life and death would be up to the hunter's whims. Handing over the military power would mean death, but not handing over the military power would make the ninth prince afraid. Only a fool would obey orders. After weighing the pros and cons, these princes of the northern borderline all chose to pretend to be deaf and dumb. As the acting king, the ninth prince's first order was met with all kinds of prevarications, with little effect. He was so angry that his chest hurt. "Bastard! I am the king of the northern kingdom. How dare they disobey my order?" The ninth prince gritted his teeth in anger. If he had known this would happen, he would have asked Sun Wen to kill them. Thinking of Sun Wen, the ninth prince's heart ached even more. The ninth prince heaved a long sigh and muttered, "If Zidao was still here, why would I need to suffer their wrath?" Sun Wen was already deified in the ninth prince's heart, becoming a cinnabar mole that could not be erased. On the second day of the second month, the dragon raised its head. This year was destined to be an extraordinary one. Jiang Pingji, who had been dormant for years, finally revealed her fangs. Seeing that the spring plowing season was approaching, the mobilization of troops at the border of the northern borderline and Chongzhou became more frequent. Occasionally, small-scale conflicts would break out. The atmosphere of war became more intense, as if a storm was brewing. In the same year, the Meng family of Zhangzhou and Huangsong officially broke off. The conflict between the Su and Pei brothers reached its climax. Zhangzhou's Yang Tao completely gained a foothold. The land of Dongqing was swallowed alive by a giant beast named War. It was swallowed into its stomach. Lu Shi and the northern borderline, Su Pei and Su Fei, Huangsong and the Meng family of Zhangzhou. These few families have stirred up the whole of Dongqing. Yang Tao frowned. Every family was at war, which meant that their development would temporarily stop. This was a good opportunity for him to grow stronger. If he waited for them to decide the winner, Yang Tao would only have Zhangzhou. He might be targeted by a few families. Only by strengthening himself could he survive in this chaotic world. But where else in Dongqing could he fight? Yang Tao scratched his head, troubled. Yan Lin said, "The world is big, Dongqing is not the only country." Yang Tao was dumbfounded. Huh? Yan Lin smiled faintly. "Do you want to compete with Lu Shi and the others?" Yang Tao said bluntly, "When the gods fight, what's the use of mortals? Even if we want to compete, now is not the time." His foundation was not as stable as Jiang Pingji and the others. If he snatched food from their mouths, it would be a strenuous and unrewarding task. Yan Lin looked down and said coldly, "The fake emperor escaped into Nanxing with his defeated army. This is a good excuse for us to attack." Dongqing's territory had already been occupied by a few gods, but other countries had not, especially Nanxing. The fake emperor Prince Changshu had escaped to Nanxing. Yang Tao could use this excuse to attack Nanxing's territory. Yan Lin said, "The feudal lords of Dongqing have more or less established themselves. It's hard to shake them now. Why don't you find another way out, my lord? From my point of view, Nanxing is a good choice." After the 4 factions of Nanman attacked Nanxing, the feudal lords of Nanxing rose in revolt. Unfortunately, the 4 factions of Nanman were strong and powerful. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. Nanxing didn't have a chance to rest and recuperate. Why don't you take this opportunity to enter Nanxing and focus on developing? When your power grows and you have enough power, it won't be too late to turn around and counterattack. What do you think, my lord? The cake of Dongqing was almost divided up. If Yang Tao wanted to get involved, he would have to fight with the feudal lords. It was too difficult. Instead of that, he might as well settle for another cake. If it was during peaceful times, how could he just casually send troops into another country's territory? He dared to try. Things were different now. Nanxing had been destroyed. All kinds of fake governments were growing crazily like chives. No one was legitimate. No one would say anything if Yang Tao wanted to interfere. Yang Tao had a good reason to do so. The fake emperor, Prince Changshu, was his enemy. Couldn't he go after his enemy across borders? All right, then I'll listen to Xiaoyang. Yang Tao could fight, but he couldn't use his brain. Anyway, he had Yan Lin, his external brain. It was not his turn to think about such things. After more than a month, the spring plowing was coming to an end. Jiang Pingji had completed the final mobilization of the troops. Is the second prince of the northern borderline still alive? Jiang Pingji turned her head and asked. Qiguan Rang waved his feather fan lightly. He's still alive. Why did you suddenly mention him? Chapter 970. Seeing the second prince of the northern borderline again, after a few months. The audience in the streaming room couldn't recognize what this thing was. Meow's wish. Streamer, I haven't eaten yet. What is this thing? Love's death soul. Is he abusing a captive? Mischievous Nuanyuan. He seems to be the second prince of the northern borderline? Is this poor little thing still alive? They thought that the second prince was dead, after falling into Jiang Pingji's hands. They didn't expect him to be so tenacious. Of course, the second prince could survive until now thanks to the care of several doctors day and night. Otherwise, he would have died a long time ago. The second prince didn't have a good life. Every day was torture. His legs were crippled, and his tongue was cut off. What was the point of living? He knew there was no point in living, but he couldn't muster the courage to commit suicide. It was better to live a bad life than to die a good death. Wasn't there a saying in the Han family of the Central Plains? After suffering one blow after another, the second prince was terrified. His arrogance had been wiped clean. He would rather eat dregs of pig's feed than die. As long as he was alive, maybe he could kill Lu Shi after the northern borderline became strong. Then he could regain his original noble identity. This thought supported the second prince to live. He forced himself to live again and again. Now he had no courage to commit suicide. He had lost the concept of time. He only knew that he was living well. Suddenly, someone took him out of the cage and washed him. They scrubbed him with bath mud, changed him into clean clothes, and washed his hair full of lice. He felt refreshed. The second prince's tongue was cut off. He couldn't speak. He could only make meaningless, sounds. The closest cage held the second prince's most trusted advisor. His situation was much better than the second prince's. He could speak and listen. Seeing a group of people about to take the second prince away, the advisor clung to the pillar of the cage and hurriedly asked, "Where are you taking him?" He thought he would be put in an important position after being captured. But Jiang Pingji looked down on him. Although she didn't say to kill him, she didn't say to let him go either. He could only waste his time in the cage. Other than the lack of freedom, he was treated well. "Where?" The warden glanced at the advisor and sneered. "Today is an auspicious day. Naturally, we will send him on his way." The second prince's hearing was fine. When he heard this, he immediately struggled violently. He got on all fours and tried to crawl away. Several jailers tied him up mercilessly. All the foreign tribes of the northern borderline should die. These prison guards were all natives of Chongzhou. They were the most vocal victims of the northern borderline's invasion of Dongqing. How could they forget the blood feud of hundreds of thousands of people at the border of Chongzhou? No matter how reluctant the second prince was, he could not resist the power of the crowd. Soon, he was thrown in front of Jiang Pingji. "I've said it before. You're the most suitable sacrifice for the flag." Jiang Pingji glanced at the second prince coldly and sneered. Today, she was dressed in a dignified imperial robe with 9 chapters. She was dressed in black and crimson, with coral hanging down from her head. She had a jade ornament and a sword, which was tied to her knees. Amateurs enjoy the show, while experts appreciate the artistry. Not to mention anything else, just from her clothes, one could see her ambition. Lao Siji Lianmeng. Imperial robe with 9 chapters. It's a high-class imperial robe that only nobles can wear. My streamer, you're amazing. The ancient times were not modern times. Not all clothes could be worn. If one wore the wrong clothes, he or she would be killed. The imperial robe symbolized social status. Only the emperor, dukes, marquises, earls, sons, men, orphans, ministers, and doctors had the right to wear it. Different people wore different imperial robes. They were roughly divided into 6 styles, which was why they were called the 6 crowns. Although Jiang Pingji was one of the feudal lords of Dongqing, the royal family of Dongqing was not completely finished. Her social status was limited to magistrate of Wanzhou. Her other identities were not recognized by the court. However, regardless of whether the court recognized it or not, Jiang Pingji would not give a damn about them. In the past, the flag was mostly sacrificed with pigs, cows, and sheep. Their blood was splashed on the ground as a sacrifice to the heavens to seek martial arts fate. If it was a war, captives or enemy generals' heads were often used as sacrifices. To boost morale, kill one to warn others. Now that Jiang Pingji was going to send troops to the northern borderline, what sacrifice could be more motivating than the second prince of the northern borderline? A long speech had to be made before the flag was sacrificed. Jiang Pingji used Wei Si's draft. Every word wept with blood. He described the cruelty of the foreign tribes in the northern borderline and the suffering of the people of Chongzhou. It evoked the anger and hatred of the soldiers. She changed the topic and ordered people to bring the sacrifice to the altar. At that moment, the hatred and morale of the soldiers had reached its peak. The sound of killing shook the heavens. The second prince knelt on the ground shivering. There were 2 people beside him who were holding his shoulders, so that he could not move. Today, this person's life will be used as a sacrifice to the countless souls who died in vain. May the heavens bless us and flatten the northern borderline. Flatten the northern borderline. Flatten the northern borderline. Flatten the northern borderline. The sound of the waves was louder than the one before it. Tens of thousands of soldiers gathered together and shouted in unison. Their murderous intent pierced through the clouds. Sacrifice to the flag. Jiang Pingji drew the sword from her waist. The snow-white blade shone with a cold light under the sunlight. Seeing that, the second prince was scared out of his wits. He did not care that his legs were crippled and his entire body was tied up. He struggled violently, trying to break free. He yelled in vain. His eyes were red and tears gathered and slid down his cheeks. However, the guards on his left and right were too strong. No matter how he struggled, they did not move an inch. The second prince changed his strategy. He tried to kowtow to Jiang Pingji and beg for mercy. He did not want glory and wealth. He did not want the identity of the second prince of the northern borderline. He only wanted to live on. As long as he could live, he would not pursue the matter of Jiang Pingji, sending people to cut off his tongue and break his legs. However, Jiang Pingji had a heart of stone. There was not a trace of compassion or benevolence in her eyes. Her right hand, that was holding the sword, was steady. "You are the first to repay the debt of the northern borderline." After saying that, she raised her hand and waved the sword in front of the desperate eyes of the second prince. A head with its eyes wide open rolled off his neck. A strong gush of blood spurted out from the wound. It stained Jiang Pingji's royal robe and the battle flag nearby. The second prince's head rolled twice. When it stopped, his cheek was facing Jiang Pingji. His eyes were wide open. "Flatten the northern borderline. Flatten the northern borderline. Flatten the northern borderline." The second prince's body collapsed. His head was placed on a plate and raised high. The soldiers below him roared louder and louder. Jiang Pingji raised her sword high. Her voice was not soft, but it was exceptionally firm. "Flatten the northern borderline." Emotions were contagious. In such an atmosphere, even a calm and composed person would become excited and high-spirited. After the sacrifice to the flag, it was time to go on stage and select the generals. Sun Wen, who was below, sighed with emotion. "I always feel that I followed an extraordinary lord." Wei Ci, who was beside him, heard it. The corners of his lips curled into a warm smile. "Yes." Chapter 971. If the Central Plains were the battlefield, Jiang Pingji could defend the city walls and avoid facing the cavalry head-on. She could use other methods to attack the north borderline. But now the northern border was the main battlefield. With such a wide terrain, it was a paradise for cavalry to come and go as they pleased. If the northern borderline wanted to do this, there was a very important premise. They have so many cavalrymen. Ever since the horse plague a few years ago, the northern borderline's cavalry had suffered a great blow and were unable to recover. The royal court of the northern borderline colluded with the Meng family of Zhangzhou to purchase maras at a high price, which greatly increased the production of foals. However, it also took time to domesticate the foals. Jiang Pingji took advantage of the time difference. She chose the most awkward time for the northern borderline to send her troops, forcing the northern borderline to fight in a sorry state. At that moment, it was unknown how many nobles of the northern borderline were cursing Jiang Pingji's ancestors. Of all the times to start the battle, they had to choose this timing. Otherwise, they could wait for the northern borderline to recover more than half of its vitality. At that time they could fight openly. If they had done it earlier, the northern borderline would not have suffered such a big loss. The money saved from the deal with the Mengs could have been invested in the expansion of the army. Now, the vitality of the northern borderline had not been restored in time, and the money that had been invested was also wasted. Lu Xi has gone too far. The ninth prince was so angry that he tore up the secret report. Damn it, she actually dared to hit him. But that woman actually used their second prince as a sacrifice. When had the northern borderline suffered such grievances? When had he ever been slapped in the face like this? Acting king, I am willing to lead the army to repel that traitor Lu. Not only was Wu Liba the wise man of the northern borderline, but he was also one of the few wise generals of the northern borderline. He was experienced in commanding and was fully qualified to lead an army. However, the ninth prince was wary of the master-disciple relationship between Wu Liba and the third prince. He did not dare to relinquish his military power, and chose another person to be the commander-in-chief with Wu Liba as his assistant. Because the king of the northern borderline suffered a stroke and was paralyzed, he was unable to handle the court affairs. The ninth prince succeeded as the acting king and temporarily took over the duties of the king of the northern borderline. Whether or not Wu Liba could become the commander-in-chief still required the approval of the ninth prince. The result did not need to be said. Wu Liba had volunteered and received this result. Naturally, he was indignant. Although he was indignant, now was not the time to be calculative about personal gains and losses. The most important thing at the moment was to repel the invading thief Liu. Even so, when Wu Liba found out who the commander-in-chief of the three armies was, he was so angry that his eyes turned red. The commander was none other than Wu Liba's political enemy, Herentia, who had assisted the ninth prince in becoming the acting king. When enemies meet, their eyes turn red. Herentia and Wu Liba were definitely incompatible like fire and water. It would already be good if they did not drag each other down. How could he expect them to advance together? The ninth prince did not notice the exchange of glances between Herentia and Wu Liba, and suddenly threw out a bomb. I intend to personally lead the army to boost the morale of the three armies. Personally lead the army? *T. Herentia and Wu Liba cursed in their hearts in unison. Was this bastard trying to stir up trouble? Don't you know what it means to be out in the field and not to obey the sovereign's orders? Putting everything else aside, the ninth prince was the acting king. After he personally led the army into battle, would the army obey the commander-in-chief or him? The ninth prince wasn't even as good as the second prince, let alone leading troops to war. At least the second prince had the experience of conquering tribes, but the ninth prince knew nothing at all. Taking 10,000 steps back, the ninth prince arrived at the front line and didn't do anything. He generously handed over the military power to the commander-in-chief and didn't interfere in the war. That wouldn't do either. The swords on the battlefield had no eyes. If the ninth prince was caught by the enemy, would he be helping or causing trouble? For the first time, Wu Liba and Herentia reached a consensus to stop the ninth prince. Acting king. Personally leading the army concerns the fate of the nation. Please think twice before acting. If they could win, it wouldn't be a problem. If they lost, the acting king would be captured or killed. Regardless of whether he was dead or alive, it would be a huge blow to the morale of the northern borderline. No matter how one looked at it, the current northern borderline had not reached the point where the acting king needed to personally lead the army. This matter could be avoided if possible. The two of them didn't know that the ninth prince wanted to lead the army personally, because he had a guilty conscience. If all the troops were transferred to the front line, he would be in charge of the imperial court. This meant that the number of troops protecting him would be greatly reduced. If his brothers joined forces to launch a sneak attack on the imperial court, wouldn't he be dead for sure? Rather than that, he might as well follow to the front line. On one hand, he could boost the morale of the three armies. On the other hand, he could control the various generals and reduce the number of collusions and disagreements in the entire army. If he could defeat Lu Shi, he might be able to be promoted from acting king to a true king. The first time he led the army personally, he achieved a great victory. What did this mean? It meant that he was the king of the northern borderline chosen by the great god of the grasslands, the Lord of Destiny. Apart from Herentia and Wu Liba, the other ministers suggested one after another. Their intentions were similar. Stay in the imperial court and don't run around. Leave the war to the adults. You'd better dig in the mud obediently. The ninth prince was furious when he heard this. He insisted on leading the army personally. No one could persuade him otherwise. The arm could not twist the thigh. The ninth prince insisted on leading the army personally. Wu Liba and Herentia could only agree with a gloomy face. Anyway, the king had more than one son. Without the ninth prince, there was still a string of princes waiting to take the throne. The northern borderline was vast. Most of it was flat grasslands, Gobi glaciers, swamps, and deserts. It seemed quiet, but it was actually full of danger. After leaving the checkpoint at the border of the northern borderline in Dongqing, the further north they went, the flatter the terrain, and the wider the field of vision. Although Sun Wen had not stayed in the northern borderline for a long time, he had done his homework. It was as if he had lived in the northern borderline for decades. Jiang Pengji listened to his suggestions carefully. She considered whether to adopt or improve them. The further we go, the more open the terrain will be. The mountains will be flat. This place is very suitable for the cavalry to assemble and charge. According to the news from the scouts, they have already set up camp by the Yi River. This place is rich in water, and the terrain is open. It's not easy to launch a sneak attack. Jiang Pengji led the vanguard battalion and the cavalry to their destination. The rest of the troops and logistics would need another day to arrive. A river? Jiang Pengji stared at the river on the map in a daze. The northern borderline has set up camp by the water? Sun Wen was puzzled. He said, according to the scouts, that is indeed the case. Setting up a camp was also very particular. The choice of the location of the camp and the distribution of the camp was a skill. Not only did they have to consider the size and position of each camp to achieve the purpose of resisting the enemy's sneak attack, but they also had to consider how to quickly transmit information and ensure that the news on the battlefield was transmitted quickly. Apart from that, there had to be a clean water source near the camp. Jiang Pengji frowned. She asked Sun Wen, Zidao, do you know the length and width of the Yi River and its source? Sun Wen was a smart man. Jiang Pengji didn't have to ask too clearly for him to guess part of it. Feng Zhen, who was beside her, had a lot of ideas. He also figured it out. My lord, do you mean to cut off their water source? I'm afraid that won't work. They know the distribution of water in the northern borderline better than we do. If we cut off this river, they can still choose another one. We can't defend against it. The water source in the northern borderline wasn't abundant, but it wasn't the time of extreme water shortage. It was just the beginning of spring. As spring and summer approached, the glaciers upstream would melt, and the river would become more abundant. Sun Wen frowned. Could it be poisoning? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.